Chapter 24 Jolie 1. Chu Qingju toyed with the invitation sketch with a flower and had an underlying fragrance. She looked at Mu Jin with interest. Let's hear it, it's winter. Rue Wang Fei is inviting people to some plum blossom banquet. It is really due to interest or to torture people. The Qin family was a literary family, so this Rue Wang Fei, Qin Bai Lu's actions did fit the label of the refined person. The flowers did not fall dew in the white dew, and dried in the cold wind. No one loves the desolate state. Even more, they avoid it and look from far away. Chu Qingju smiled as she put the invitation to one side, and exhaling a warm breath. If there is much white dew, the autumn rice's ears are full. I wonder after the frost, is there really a good harvest? Mu Jin smiled and placed the invitation to one side. She replied, Newbie heard that if there is frost before and after the white dew, there will be a good harvest. Dew without frost, the harvest could only be bad. Our Mu Jin knows so much, Chu Qingju stood. Since it is the first banquet since Sandaimei II married into the imperial family, I, as her Sasa, 3, can't be absent. Get somebody to send back a reply. Just say that I will arrive on time. In Lu came in with a branch of red plum blossoms. Hearing Chu Qingju's words, she remarked as she inserted the branch into a vase. Yesterday night, it just coincidentally snowed. Even though it is a good time to look at the plum blossoms, but it is very cold. Chu Qingju gazed at that branch of red plum blossoms. She taunted, so common, so common. Tomorrow, I'm not taking you to Rue Wang Fu. In Lu opened her mouth to speak, but saw Yuzan walking in followed by Jin Zhan. Both had smiles on their faces as though they had encountered something good. Wang Fei, the two bowed. Yuzan, who had walked at the front, notified in a quiet voice, Wang Fei, just now news from the west corner came. Wang Yi demoted Feng Shi to Yinyang. The Feng family came again and was lectured by Wang Yi. Hearing the news, Chu Qingju had the feeling that this was what was expected. She loosened her grasp on the hand warmer to hold a cup of hot tea. Did Feng Shi make any noise? Yuzan curled her lip and continued. Newbie heard the tantrum started early in the morning, but nobody paid attention, so some things were smashed. It managed to quiet down by noon, but until now, she still hasn't eaten. This Feng Shi still hadn't given up. Last time after she had begged in front of Wang Fei, she had quieted for 2 days. Today, hearing that Wang Yi was demoting her, she once again started a senseless tantrum. Let the kitchen know to not slight Shi Jiao Yuan's food. Chu Qingju sipped on a cup of tea and intoned, it doesn't matter if Feng Shi eats or not. Whatever her stipend is, it will all be given to her. As to the objects she smashes, let her. Our Wang Fu might not be extravagant, but it's possible to sacrifice a few vases. Don't stop her. That little suite in the western corner of Wang Fu, she wondered what it was like now. Hearing Wang Fei's words, Mu Jin assured from the side, don't worry, Wang Fei. Newbie will tell Huang Yang to send your words over immediately. It's such a pity that Wang Fei's generosity and mercy hasn't eased Feng Shi's hubris. Such a disappointment. It can't be helped. She's a pampered and spoiled daughter of a government official. Her hubris is a habit. Chu Qingju put down the teacup. Just a little Shirchia. There's no need to take her seriously. In Lu heard this and raised her head. She saw Wang Fei and Mu Jin share the same smile. This smile seemed to have a hint of deviousness. The words were reasonable, but why were Wang Fei and Mu Jin's smiles so strange? Feng Shi is still having a fit? He Hong came back to his fu and heard Xiao Ganzi's report. He frowned. What's she throwing a tantrum about? Hearing this, Xiao Ganzi lowered his head and an awkward expression appeared on his face. Feng Shirchia hasn't eaten or drank since this morning. She attempted to see you but was blocked by the guards, so she just said a few words of complaint. Complaining? Complaining about who? He Hung stopped in his steps, his brow slightly furrowing. Complaining of Bin Wang, or is it Wang Fei? Xiao Ganzi bent his body even lower, his voice smaller. Feng Shirchia holds such deep affection for Wang Yi she wouldn't complain about Wang Yi. Then she is complaining about Wang Fei? He Hung sneered. Just favored her for a few days, and she forgets who she really is. Qin Chang Xin. Go personally to Shi Jiao Yuan to tell Feng Shi. The Feng family came to the fu today. If she still isn't satisfied and can't keep calm, then pack up and return back to the Feng family. Bin Wang's place won't accept a shirtia that's nobler than Wang Fei. Qian Chang Xian received his orders and stared deeply at Xiao Gai Ji before leaving. This kid stated that Feng Shi was full of love for Wang Yi, but the underlying meaning was that she was discontent with Wang Fei. He seemed to be serving at Wang Fei's side. The kid did have brains. No wonder he was a few years younger, but already climbed to such a position. How a servant answered a question, there were different ways. The same meaning, said in different ways, the impression would be different. Feng Shi, she would spend the rest of her life in that cold and remote Shijiaoyuan. When Qian Chang Xian reached Shijiaoyuan, he saw haphazardly planted banana trees, gathered in messy clumps. Weeds crowded in the corners. The scenery wasn't as beautiful as the name had implied. Qian Chang Xian's brows creased and relaxed as he saw the rice and dishes that littered the ground of the doorway. A young Taijian who had been following him quickly came forward and kicked aside the pieces of broken porcelain. Qianye. 4. Be careful with your feet. Qian Chang Xian silently walked in. He scanned the room. The ground was full of broken pottery, and then he looked at Ping Zijin, who had just raised a slender porcelain vase. He raised his voice to holler. What is Feng Zhuzi doing? Feng Zijin saw the person that came was Qian Chang Xian, who served by Wang Ye's side, and her eyes light up. She put down the vase and asked, Qian Gonggong, is it Wang Yi that sent you to see me? Qian Chang Xian snorted and picked a place to set down his feet. Who else other than Wang Yi would send Nukai? When he finished, he saw happiness crawl onto Feng Shi's face. He slowly drawled. Wang Yi said, if you keep throwing a fit like this, your family will be called to take you home. Today, the Feng family had come to our Fu. Looking at how concerned they were for you, they would love to do so. The joy on Feng Zijin's face retreated like the tide. She stared dazedly at Qian Chang Xian, who left without a second look and powerlessly sat on a worn chair. A long while later, her eyes reddened and the tears came down. She knew she was finished. This was it for her entire life. Zhuzi, a Yahuan, saw the paleness of Ping Zijin's face and couldn't resist comforting her. Don't take it so heavily. After Wang Ye's anger cools, he will be good to you again. Feng Zijin gave a smile that was uglier than her crying. She stared with red-rimmed eyes at her Yatu. Bai Tao, don't comfort me. Wang Yi doesn't want to see me again. Stopping there, she suddenly laughed. How could I forget? I'm just a Chia. Why did I think that the only difference between Si Fei and Wang Fei was only one word? Thinking back to when she purposefully organized for servants to give Chu Qingju incompatible foods to cause Chu Qingju to slowly fall ill, she muttered, Karma, this is all karma. Bai Tao heard her mistress's whispers, her face suddenly changing. The servants had passed around the rumor that Wang Fei was too angry over Ban Xia, which caused her to become ill. But she knew Wang Fei wasn't ill because of her anger, but due to having eaten incompatible foods. Those foods had caused her body to become weaker and weaker to the point of not being able to leave the bed. But who knew that Wang Fei had suddenly recovered and punished the kitchen servants? After that, she personally ordered her food. Perhaps it was from the day that Wang Fei had recovered. This day was fated to happen. She looked around at the dilapidated Shijiaoyuan. Bai Tao scrunched up a handkerchief to wipe her mistress' face as she gave a bitter smile. Maybe it was karma, or fate. Due to the fact snow had fallen for the last 2 nights, so even though there were people who swept the streets, there was still a thick layer remaining. The people who made a living on the street bore the attack of the snowflakes as they saw, from far away, a carriage with an ebony roof drawn by 4 horses slowly proceed. Each time the horses stepped forward, a ringing would come from the carriage. Preceding and succeeding the carriage were guardmen, Taijian, and imperial bodyguards. Everybody on the street understood when they saw the procession. This was another procession of an imperial family member. The rumor was that the 3rd Wang Fei was holding a plum blossom viewing banquet. That would be the most likely destination for these people. This carriage isn't as luxurious as the last few. A passerby commented in a quiet voice, Wonder which family is it? Just shut up and don't be so ignorant. The carriages before were 2-horse carriages. That one was a 4-horse carriage. Unless it's a Jun Wang or above, who else dare to use 4 horses for a carriage? A person beside him who had heard the comment explained, "That person is most likely a Wang Fei. See how the carriage is made out of ebony?" Stopping, he pointed in the direction of the imperial palace. "Only the emperor and the emperor's children can use a sandalwood carriage." The person who had spoken before instantly paled. He feared that his words would pass into the ears of the noble personages. That would be very unfortunate for him. Chu Qingju didn't think that the carriage she was riding would become another's topic of discussion. When she reached Rue Wangfu, she coincidentally arrived at the same time as the procession of Ning Wangfei, the wife of Lauda. After allowing Ning Wangfei to enter first, she sat down on the sedan to enter her men. Passing through the gate of drooping flowers, the sedan stopped. After she held Mu Jin's hand to exit out the sedan's door, she saw a few women dressed grandly standing at the threshold of the gate. She looked over and bowed to Ning Wangfei. "Greetings to De Huang Sa. Daimai doesn't have to be so courteous." Ning Wangfei reached out to support Chu Qingju, a warm and gentle smile on her face. Chu Qingju smiled at Ning Wangfei and looked towards Rue Wangfei, who had been standing a step behind Ning Wangfei. The two bowed one after the other, which passed for a greeting. At this time, many others came over to greet Chu Qingju. When the disturbance calmed, the three Jolie chatted among themselves as they walked at the very front. They seemed so intimate that even blood sisters couldn't compare. Huang Sa was late today. She has to drink later. Qin Bai Lu held Chu Qingju's hand. Her voice was thin and soft. She teased, "You can't refuse." Ning Wangfei knew that Chu Qingju arrived at almost the exact same time as her, but she let her enter first, so she interjected. "Sendaimai, you may not know. Yurisa arrived at the same time as me. But it was just I came in first. You can't punish her for that." The two had arrived one after the other. How could Qin Bai Lu not know? But finding out that the two hadn't agreed to arrive together, she didn't raise the issue again and turned to converse on the plum blossoms in the garden. Chu Qingju listened cheerfully, and her gaze seemed to accidentally pass over Ning Wangfei. The rumor was that Ning Wangfei Wei Qing was very virtuous, as she ran Ning Wangfu very successfully, and the concubines lived in harmony with her. Today, as she met the real person, the rumors didn't live up. She couldn't help but sigh. No wonder she was a wife of the imperial family. 1. Referring to the relation of wives of brothers. 2. Younger brother's wife. 3. Older brother's wife. 4. Grandfather, Gramps, term used to refer to a Taijian /N. Chapter 25. Women. The plum forest of Rue Wangfu might not be the most beautiful in the city of Jing, but it was the most famous plum forest in the city of Jing, because these plum trees were personally bestowed by the emperor. At the beginning, when Rue Wang was leaving the palace to construct his fu, he said he liked plum blossoms, so the emperor sent out an imperial decree and picked plum trees for the Ministry of Works to plant. Therefore, nobody in the entire Jing city would say that the plum blossoms of Rue Wangfu were not beautiful. Even though there was a mountain full of plum trees in the suburbs where many scholars and literati preferred to compose their poems and paint, nobody dare say that the mountain was the most beautiful plum forest in the city. Rue Wangfu's size was about the same as He Heng's Wangfu. The layout was similar, but the style and finer details were drastically different. If Chu Qingju had to pick a label to describe it, it would be lavish. Long stretches of corridors, fake mountains with flowers and grass. Every bit projected the feeling of luxury. Chu Qingju was forced to admit, He Heng was actually a good child with his frugality. But this Rue Wangfu was too ostentatious. It was as though they were afraid that people wouldn't know that their master was the most favored by the emperor. People said that you could see a person's taste from the house they lived in. Of course, this only applied to people who had money. If Rue Wangfu's style was considered to be lavish, then the house He Heng lived in was low-key, tasteful luxury. From this point, it was possible to see the different personalities of the two brothers. Passing through a moon door, the snow that had gathered on the stone paths had already been swept away so that the people admiring the flowers were not impeded. Chu Qingju gazed afar. This moderately sized plum forest, in the midst of the fine snow, did have a sense of beauty. She blinked her eyes and teased Qin Bai Lu. Daimai is so lucky to have such a large and beautiful plum forest in your own home. Oh, it's nothing. Qin Bai Lu returned the smile. Daimei has heard that Ursa will have a beautiful lotus pond when the summer comes. If what Mimi says is true, then next summer, I will definitely invite everybody there to admire the lotuses. The cloak that Chu Qingju was draped in was a vibrant pomegranate red, edged in silver fox fur. The silver and red contrasted against Chu Qingju's pale face to seem even more fresh and young. Such a pity that I entered only when it was autumn and didn't know that the Fu had such beautiful attractions. At this time, Ning Wang Fei Wei Qingyi laughed, as a little unmarried girl who would know such things. But saying it now, it can be seen that her Shu treats Daimei very well. Otherwise, how can there be such free and relaxed days, and to not have to pay attention to what's inside the Fu? Chu Qingju heard this and knew that Wei Qingyi was laughing at Qin Bailu for knowing so much as a just married woman and mocked her for not knowing how to run a household. But she said it so beautifully, nobody could pick it out. So she smiled widely, and with a voice full of admiration, she pled, Saw, don't tease Daimei anymore. Sa is so virtuous and good at running a household. But I'm such a dummy. When I have to deal with the household, I'm always flustered. Luckily, our Wang Yi is magnanimous and doesn't blame me. Otherwise, I'll be too ashamed to leave my rooms. Sa's words are a little incorrect. Qin Bailu followed, you're more capable than I am. Yesterday, our Wang Yi laughed at me for mixing many things up. What I think we should do is we should learn from Sa. The loving affection that was being boasted off directly hit Wei Qingyi's wound, but the smile on her face grew warmer. This is nothing, you'll slowly learn. At this time in a new marriage, it was naturally sweet like honey. But as the days pass and new people come, let's see if you can still say our Wang Yi. When I first married, they laughed at me too. Now that you mentioned it, I'm now thinking about the past. The three mutually looked at each other and laughed. They slowly walked towards the pavilion overlooking plums in the middle of the plum forest. Behind them, the crowd of noble women and officials' wives followed with smiles on their faces, but their hearts were tense. It looked as though all three of the Wang Fei weren't gullible. Especially tense was Luo Shi, who was also in the crowd. As Chu Qingju's aunt, she was worried that her niece would accidentally fall into the word traps of the other two Wang Fei. The pavilion overlooking plums was a two-level pavilion built specifically for admiring plum blossoms in the winter. The womenfolk sat inside the pavilion to look at the plum trees. They were free from the cold of the wind and snow and could partake in refreshments. The height to look at the scenery was especially good. Chu Qingju loosened her cloak and revealed a head full of hair that had been hidden. Under Mu Jin's service, she exchanged the cloak for a silver fox skin cape. She waited for Wei Qingyi to sit before sitting down herself at the table under the guidance of Qin Bailu. Because there were charcoal pans in the corner of the room, even the wind that blew and didn't cause her to feel cold. Chu Qingju had just been poured a cup of hot tea when she heard Wei Qingyi ask, "Isn't this a very good Longjing?" She followed the sound and saw the other take a sip of tea. As expected from Sa, Qin Bailu smiled and informed, "This is Shihu Longjing. The emperor bestowed down from part of the imperial tribute. It is too much of a waste to drink this on a daily basis, but to use this tea to treat everybody, it is most fitting. Rui Wang Fei's tea is so good that even us common people find it delicious." The Marquis of Baorong interjected, "Chen Fu 1 is taking advantage of Wang Fei's good fortune to be able to taste such deliciousness." Everybody knew that Baorong Hofu was close to Rui Wang Fu. Seeing the Marquis of Baorong's ingratiating manner, it was sweet enough to make their teeth ache. The people who were able to come admire the plum blossoms were not of insignificant status, and most were very careful when speaking. There really weren't many who were as straightforward as the Marquis. Baorong Hofuren is too complimentary. Qin Bailu didn't like the overkeen flattery of the Marquis of Baorong, but knowing that the Marquis of Baorong was one of Wang Ye's people, she kept a smile on her face as she gazed at the crowd. The greatest accomplishment it will ever achieve is that everybody enjoys drinking it. Each year, not even 10 caddies of the imperial tribute Longjing were produced. The fact that Rui Wang Fu could serve it to guests, it could be seen just how much the emperor had bestowed. This was also what Qin Bailu wanted everybody present to know. Otherwise, any tea would do. Why did she have to specifically use the Longjing tea from the imperial tribute? Was it to let everybody feel that the one the emperor held most important was He Yuan, and turned to support He Yuan to succeed the throne? Chu Qingju blew on the tea leaves floating on the surface, a smile appearing on her face. Nobody who sat here was stupid. If they really changed sides because of this bit of tea, they wouldn't have made it to this place in the first place. San Daimei is so generous. Wei Qingyi took another sip, to be willing to let everybody have a taste of the tea that Fu Huang has bestowed. Dasa here will give her thanks. Dasa, don't be so polite. We are one family. There's no need to distinguish so much. Stopping there, her gaze suddenly landed on the Marquis of Xiangqing, Luo Shi. Speaking of this, the Marquis of Xiangqing is part of Erseo's maternal family. Chu Qingju heard the topic had moved towards her and put down her teacup to look at her aunt. She had seen her aunt, Luo Shi, when she had arrived, but it hadn't been a good place to converse. Since Qin Bailu was pushing the focus onto her now, she would naturally accept it. San Daimei isn't wrong. This is my Jiamu. From very little, I have received much care from my Jiamu. If I knew earlier that Jiamu was coming today, I'm afraid I would have come to disturb you much earlier. I see that the person Erseo wants to see the most isn't Daimei, but the Marquis of Xiangqing. Qing Bailu covered up a smile and said in a mocking tone, I can't compete with the Marquis of Xiangqing. You and I are part of one family. We will see each other often in the future. There's nothing special. Jiamu is my relative. We won't be as intimate as you and I. Chu Qingju said in a confiding tone. Daimei isn't sad. You're laughing at me? I don't dare laugh at Sa. Qin Bailu hadn't expected that Chu Qingju would say such words, and with a smile, she replied, Sa is close to her aunt. Nobody would laugh. Luo Shi saw the two had finished and said warmly, Rui Wangfei must excuse us. It's just that Qinfu and Rui Wangfei hasn't seen each other for many days. Wangfei is angry at Qinfu as her Jiamu, so she is purposefully saying such things. Chu Qingju smiled and stood to beg for mercy. Jiamu, don't say any more. If my cousins knew that I wronged you, they wouldn't let me into the Fu in the future. Luo Shi smiled and half declined to receive the bow and bowed in reply. They exchanged a few more words before calmly sitting down. She didn't forget her own position because of Chu Qingju's identity. The people present clearly saw the intimacy between the two. People had said that aunts usually didn't treat their nieces well, but look at this family. Weren't they so very close? Chu Qingju knew that Luo Shi was worried that she would be bullied by Qing Bailu, so she had stood out. But she didn't want to involve the Tian family into the succession conflict and purposefully put the Tian family on the position of the stern elder, and not normal people who were relying on the Wang Fu. Everybody gradually saw a hint of what really occurred inside in their hearts. The Tian family was really a hard rock. Other than loyalty to the emperor, they didn't side with anybody. Even if their niece had married into the Wang Fu, it didn't seem their attitude had changed. They didn't purposefully dissociate themselves, but nor did they insincerely flatter. This type of conduct really did seem like what the Tian family would do. So sometimes, something that seemed natural wouldn't cause people to think much of it. Even Wei Qingyi and Qin Bailu could see that the Tian family didn't have the desire to side with He Heng. They couldn't help but sympathize with Chu Qingju. Disregarding the troublesome maternal family, even her uncle's family wouldn't change their attitudes for her. How would she continue to live in Duan Wang Fu? The snow is getting heavier. Wei Qingyi turned to look outside the window and saw the plum flowers proudly blooming in the snow. In this white world, it is the red blossoms which are the most eye-catching. And they are also beautiful. Of course, the red is the right color. No matter how pretty the other colors are, in the midst of the winds and snow, they don't distinguish themselves. Qin Bailu smiled and asked, What does foreign think? Chu Qingju continued her interest in drinking tea. The words on the surface were complimenting the flowers, but underneath, wasn't it saying that the wife was the right way, and the Chia were an embarrassment? Everybody present was a wife and naturally concurred, full of praise for the red blossoms. A few of the younger ladies who came with their mothers, regardless if they understood or not, smiled and listened as though Qin Bailu was really complimenting the plum blossoms. After admiring the flowers for a long while, and the snow get even heavier, the participants were served the noon meal in the pavilion. After the meal, there was tea and conversation. Chu Qingju mused that this kind of gathering was boring, and at the same time, she defended against the verbal attacks of Wei and Qing. A lot of tea was poured into her stomach in the meantime. Wei Qingyi saw the snow was becoming heavier and heavier, so she stood to make her farewells. Seeing the situation, Chu Qingju and the others also stood to make their farewells together. But they were persuaded by Qin Bailu, who said that the snow was too heavy and that the carriages wouldn't be able to travel easily on the roads to wait for each of the Fu to send over their sedans. Everybody could only agree. They once again sat to chat about hair ornaments and clothes and give mutual compliments. A1 means official or your servant when speaking to the emperor/imperial family is woman and used for married women. Chapter 26. People are not the same. Roads are not the same when it came to clothing and adornments. Women would always have many words. Which place had the best rouge? Which place had the most exquisite hairpins? Which place had the best embroiders? In conclusion, the topic was limitless. The three Wang Fei present were different in their styles of dress. Ning Wang Fei was dignified and staid. An embroidered goose-yellow dress covered with a pure white cape. The hair was styled into a yuanbaji one and set off with a whole set of jeweled tamian. 2. She looked dignified yet noble. Rue Wang Fei didn't have a cape but wore a silver mouse fur coat. She had a subdued duowoji. 3. Beautiful and graceful with a hint of scholarliness. Chu Qingju's appearance was the best among the three of them. What she wore wasn't as dignified as Ning Wang Fei or as scholarly as Rue Wang Fei. She was breathtaking, was what the women present thought. No wonder Duan Wang Yi would get angry on her behalf at Changde Gong Fu. If any newly married wife had such a beauty, not many men would not favor her at all. Daimei, the butterflies and peony embroidered on the edge of this dress is very beautiful. Wei Qingyi's eyes swept over the hem of the dress Chu Qingju wore that was revealed under the cape. At a glance, it seems almost alive. Sa is too nice. There's a Yahuan that serves on by my side. When it isn't busy, she likes to work on this kind of things. Chu Qingju raised an eyebrow. I normally don't use any other embroidery women, so I let them play among themselves. It's fine as long as I can wear it out the door. Everybody else sitting here also have some embroidery women, but Sa is too modest. I think this dress is extremely beautiful. Qin Bailu complimented Chu Qingju, but inside, she thought this Urseo was too shallow. No matter how much care she took with her clothing, without any scholarly and artistic talent, how was she different from the common people? The others, foreign present, complimented the three. Their words along the lines of noble, beautiful, magnificent, or dignified. Along the way, they criticized themselves to create a contrast. To them, admiring the blossoms wasn't the most important. What was important was that these three were happy. Then they have almost completely fulfilled their duty at this plum blossom banquet. Wei Qingyi was the eldest among the three, so she held herself as the most steady, and when talking with Chu Qingju and Qin Bailu, her voice held a hint of the affection elders had for those younger. She waited for the officials' wives to finish flattering them and interrupted. All of you should not compliment these two anymore. Otherwise, they would get bashful. The Qinfu laughed and replied that they only said the truth. It wasn't complimenting them. Chu Qingju looked at this room full of women. Each person had the most natural smile, as though each was happier than the next. At this time, she couldn't help but feel tired for these people, but thinking that when these people returned home, they would naturally have others to flatter them, she could only sigh to herself. It was lucky that she hadn't become a wife of a common man. Otherwise, it would be even more difficult to live in this kind of era and social conventions. Saw, I heard that the Duchess of Chengde fell sick in the past few days. She couldn't even manage to attend today's banquet. How is she now? Qin Bailu looked at Chu Qingju, who seemed to be always smiling with the corners of her eyes, and suddenly asked, the third young lady of the Fu even seemed to have fallen ill due to caring for her mother? Chu Qingju's eyebrows moved slightly, the mirth at the corner of her eyes not diminishing. Really? Saw didn't know? Qin Bailu asked with a hint of shock. It seems like I asked the wrong person. Putting down the teacup in her hand, Chu Qingju pushed the teacup to one side. Daimei's eyes and ears are as intelligent as expected. Saw thanks you for your notice. Finishing, she stood. It seems that this snow has stopped already. Daimei is so hospitable that I shouldn't leave, but there is much to do at the Fu, so Saw will leave first. Finishing, She didn't care to see what expression Qin Bai Lu revealed and bowed slightly to Wei Qingyi. She turned and left, supporting herself on Mu Jin's hand. Everybody present stopped in shock and quickly stood to bid farewell to find that Duan Wangfei had already passed the door. Qin Bai Lu hadn't thought that Chu Qingju would just stand up and leave. She had been smiling just a second ago. Her expression had instantaneously changed. Her own face was frozen in irritation that somebody had insulted her, and it took her a while to suppress the rage. Wei Qingyi smiled and stood. She also unhesitatingly bid her farewells. She clearly didn't desire to remain at this place to give honor to Qin Bai Lu. Ning Wang might not be close to He Hong, but it was better than with He Yuan. Why would she side with Qin Bai Lu and offend Chu Qingju? When the two Wang Fei left, half of the crowd of noblewomen continuously left, leaving behind only the members of the families that had sided with He Yuan. Wang Fei, this Duan Wang Fei is too straightforward. The Yahuan that supported Wei Qingyi exclaimed in a quiet voice. Newbie saw that Rui Wang Fei's expression even changed. Change is good. She keeps doing her act of the talented woman. It's so distasteful. When Wei Qingyi came out of the pavilion, she mocked, this entire city, who doesn't know that the second Duchess of Changde, 4, treated Duan Wang Fei badly. Qin Bai Lu was clearly accusing Chu Qingju of being unfilial. She was purposefully embarrassing Chu Qingju. Even so, but the way Duan Wang Fei left, wouldn't people say she is unfilial? The Yahuan looked at the surrounding and seeing no one around, she quipped, I hadn't thought that Duan Wang Fei's personality was like this. Who doesn't have sore spots? Wei Qingyi expressionlessly stepped on the snow. All in the Jing city knows that, as a stepmother, the second Duchess of Changde was not loving. Chu Qingju dares to do so. She isn't afraid of being talked about. Also, in Jing city, who would, for a second Duchess of Changde, criticize a Wang Fei? A member of the imperial family, a right is right, but a wrong is still right. Didn't you see that Duan Wang Fei was very respectful to the Marchioness of Xiangqing, thinking that she was experienced after reading those stupid books? Wei Qingyi smiled coldly. From her point of view, Qin Bai Lu clearly was a pedant. Were those words what she, as a daimai, could say to her Saozi? No wonder Chu Qingju mocked Qin Bai Lu for being intelligent with her eyes and ears. After what happened today, tomorrow the rumor would be that Rui Wang Fu knew everything that occurred in the city of Jing. Whose home didn't have things that people shouldn't see? In the future, the officials in Jing would be at least wary of Rui Wang Fu. She was happy to spectate at the chaos. But Chu Qingju had guts to turn and leave. Not just anyone would have the boldness. At this time, the sedan carrying Chu Qingju was slowly making its way to the front gate. Chu Qingju sat in the sedan without the anger that everybody else was imagining. At the beginning, she had the decree that if you who wouldn't let me be happy, then I would make it difficult for you. She dared to leave, and she wasn't afraid of becoming enemies with Qin Bai Lu. Additionally, even if she didn't storm off, the two of them wouldn't have good relations in the future. The swaying and bouncing sedan suddenly stopped. Chu Qingju heard the servants outside kneel and voice a greeting. She slightly pulled back the window curtain and saw a person wearing a white cloak with a taijian accompanying him, standing 5 paces away from the sedan. This person was Rui Wang He Yuan. Chu Qingju instantly let go of the curtain in her hand and sat back in the sedan without a word. He Yuan saw the slight movement of the curtain on the sedan and slightly bowed at the waist. Greetings to her saw. San Shu is too courteous. Chu Qingju didn't have any interest in men that was as beautiful as a woman and faintly returned. Thanks for your hospitality today, but it is late, so farewell. Farewell saw. He Yuan placed his hand behind his back and looked at the sedan sway and bounce as it left. Then he saw a young taijian quickly run over. Wang Yi, one of the gatekeepers, just reported that Duan Wang Ye's sedan has stopped at the gate, but he doesn't know why it hasn't entered. Turning to look at the faraway sedan, He Yuan snorted. Since Bin Wang's good brother isn't entering the Fu, Bin Wang won't disturb him. He actually came personally to pick her up. Did this He Hong get addicted to pretending to be a romantic? Just as he finished, he saw a few more sedans coming from the direction of the plum forest. He turned and walked to the side, avoiding the sedans of the womenfolk. Knowing that Qin Bai Lu had invited the women to today's banquet, he didn't have any objections. But he looked down on his Wang Fei's love for admiring plum blossoms in a snowstorm. No wonder people said the virtue of a woman was to have no talents. Women who read too many books, they were so picky. Was it impossible to admire plum blossoms at some other time? Luo Shi sat in the sedan and thought back to what had happened at the banquet. She felt that her niece seemed different than before. Her words were as few as in the past, but the aura she exuded had become stronger. It seemed that Duan Wangyi did treat her well. Otherwise, her niece wouldn't have the bravery to storm away to embarrassed Rue Wang Fei. The sedan stopped inside the main gate and Luo Shi came out. She found many of the foreign were standing at the spot as though they were waiting for something. What's going on? She walked towards a foreign that she had good relations with and asked in a light voice, "Why aren't they leaving?" Duan Wangye's sedan is outside. This foreign raised her chin and motioned for her to look at the main gate. She suddenly smiled and teased, "I think that Duan Wang really cares for your niece." Luo Shi, upon hearing this, looked at the gate and saw her niece take Duan Wang's hand to enter the sedan. That red cloak dragging over the white snow was especially beautiful. Seeing that Duan Wang waited for her niece to sit down before he followed, Luo Shi took back her gaze. Under the gazes that the women surrounding her sent over, the smile on her face was the same as any other day. Wei Qingyi held her servant's hand as she stood outside the gate. Seeing Duan Wang Fu's sedan being carried far away, her expression was distant. For Ning Wang Fu, she poured her heart in, but she hadn't seen Wang Yi treat her this way. Chu Qingju, other than her exceptional appearance, was she as good as her in any area? Could it be that everything she had done, it wasn't enough to surpass Chu Qingju's gorgeous dress? Even that cloak that Chu Qingju carelessly dragged on the snow, it was made from the finest yun brocade and sewn with silk on the inside. When it touched water, it would wrinkle. Just this one cloak, it would cost several hundreds of gold. Now that this cloak has been dragged in the snow, naturally it couldn't be worn anymore. The Wang Fu naturally didn't care about the money, but she was used to running a household and everything used in the household was budgeted. She herself wasn't used to such extravagance. As the wife, why would she copy those Cheshire and spend all her attention on clothing and makeup? Wang Fei, the Yahuan beside her saw she hadn't moved and worriedly looked at her. "Let's go." Wei Qingyi smiled. She didn't have to compete with Chu Qingju. When he hung was tired of her, her beautiful dress would become lavishness and wastefulness. Her conduct will become willfulness and pretension. And she herself didn't need this time of magnificence. No matter what time and place, she was always the most dignified and virtuous Ning Wang Fei. This was the road that the wives of the imperial family should walk. 1. A style of hair with the hair gathered in a top knot. 2. Ornaments for hair. The specific style would vary by the dynasty. 3. A hairstyle where the hair is gathered in a knot at one side of the head near the top. It has been described as on the edge of falling off. 4. The second refers to the fact she is the second wife of the Duke of Changde, not the original wife. Chapter 27 Damsel in Distress is a liar because it was a snowy day, and even though the sedan carriers walked very carefully, Chu Qingju still felt that the sedan underneath her swayed heavily. She wanted to raise the curtain to look outside, but thinking that He Hong was still sitting beside her, she only smiled and asked, "Why did Wang Yi come?" "I had to attend to some matters in the morning and I coincidentally passed, so I thought that since you were on Sandy's Fu, I would wait for you to go home together." He Hung raised a hand to pull back the curtain to look outside. The snow was falling heavily and not many people were on the streets. This snow is getting worse. In the future, if the weather is like this, then you shouldn't leave home. Who is willing to bother in this kind of weather? Chu Qingju smiled and glanced at him, but it was San Daimiai's first time sending an invitation. It wouldn't be good to reject her, so I had to come. He Hung saw her expression held hints of unwillingness and laughed. He patted the back of her hand. "Did something make you unhappy at the banquet?" He Yuan's Wang Fei Qin sure. Didn't she come from a well-educated family? Telling you to make you happy? Chu Qingju turned and patted his hand. "Don't even mention it. Our good Daimiai. She criticized Chia for not being filial to my stepmother." He was a bit surprised by the pat that Chu Qingju gave. He Hung looked at the back of his hand that had suffered a blow and felt that that place felt a bit tickled. He curled his finger and raised an eyebrow before stating, "She, as your daimyo, to say such things, don't pay any attention. That Liang sure, she isn't deserving of any of your filial piety. As your stepmother, she wasn't loving, yet she still wants others to respect and love her. She should take a look in the mirror." He looked down on the entire family of Changde Gongfu, and for Liang Shi, he had an even worse impression. At present, Chu Qingju was his wife. Was this dynasty's Wang Fei? The other was a little duchess. Did she think she could posture in front of Wang Fei? The fact that Changde Gongfu was rude to Chu Qingju, that was not taking him seriously. He, as a Wang Yi, how could he be overlooked by this family? They weren't anything. Detecting the other's emotions, Chu Qingju's smile became even prettier. "Wang Yi, don't be angry. You care for me, I know." Hearing Chu Qingju changed her way of speech in front of him to call herself I, He Hung didn't feel as though he wasn't respected. Quite the opposite, he felt that this was Chu Qingju becoming closer with him. He raised his head and saw the other's eyes shining like the stars and the thankfulness on her face. His heart moved slightly, and he suddenly felt that this was good between husband and wife. This woman was his wife. She was the woman that was going to accompany him together down the road. If they always maintained the respect and distance, it wouldn't be interesting. "This is caring for you?" He Hung smiled even more warmly. "I know you don't like going to Changde Gongfu. In the future, you don't have to bother with those people. For everything, I'm behind you." Chu Qingju turned her head to look at him, and right as he stared in a daze, suddenly pushed her head into his chest. "Wang Yi, the way you are would make me change into a bad person. Bin Wang's woman, she only needs to be good to me. To others, being bad is fine." The corners of He Hang's lips raised lightly, and he unconsciously reached out with his hand to carefully wrap around her waist to prevent Chu Qingju from accidentally falling off. Lying on He Hang's chest, Chu Qingju thought that it was lucky she had seen many men comfort women. Otherwise, with how skilled He Hang's tactics were, she would have fell in early on. Look at this conduct, the words, it was the epitome of deep love. At this time, the sedan abruptly swayed. He Hung quickly reached with both hands to protect Chu Qingju, their bodies moving backwards and avoiding the window, which would be an easy avenue of attack. He then manipulated the other to lie on his knees before asking harshly, "What is it?" "Wang Yi, there's someone blocking the road ahead, outside the curtain." Qian Chong Exine looked at the ruffians chasing a beauty act and bowed before answering. "There's some people chasing after a woman ahead." His voice was relaxed, but the place he was standing perfectly blocked the entrance to the sedan. The other guards placed their hands on their swords. Hearing this, Chu Qingju moved her body, and in response, He Hung reached with 2 fingers to tap on her head. Seeing Chu Qingju stare with 2 big eyes at him, He Hung smiled at her before commanding, "Clear the road." When the rough men in pursuit saw the procession, they had quickly stopped and retreated to one side. They only hated that they didn't have good luck, that they would, in this kind of weather, encounter nobility sitting in an 8-person sedan. Hearing the noble speak, the men obediently knelt to one side, afraid the noble would blame them for their offense. The young woman kneeling at the front saw the situation, and her eyes brightened. She knelt with a bang about 6 meters from the sedan. "Darren, please Darren, save this girl. These criminals want to capture this girl to become a concubine for a landlord. Please, Darren, save this girl." They could even encounter such a thing as kidnapping a citizen? Chu Qingju crisply moved herself into a comfortable position leaning against He Hang's legs. She teased with a laugh. Such a cold and wintry place, a helpless and pitiful girl asking for help. "Wang Yi, do you want to be a hero and rescue the damsel?" He Hung saw the mischief in her smile and pressed against the corner of her lips with his index finger. "The beauty is already here. I don't see a beauty anywhere else." Opening her mouth and biting down on that finger, Chu Qingju used her teeth and ground against it before whining. Who knows if that little beauty's pitiful state would move someone? Enjoying Chu Qingju's pretty state very much, He Hung smiled and scorned, "This vinegar one is unreasonable. A strange common woman. I won't even want her to be a servant girl on the Wang Fu. How would I let her serve me?" Standing outside, Qian Xian silently turned his head in the other direction and pretended he didn't hear anything from the sedan. He looked at the girl kneeling. She was about 16 or 17, her hair tangled from running, but with that pale and fine face, there was a hint of a delicate beauty that would provoke pity. She was wearing a water blue tight girdled cotton dress which wasn't very sturdy and did have some hints of beauty. But when his gaze swept across the hand that was half hidden in her sleeve, his face darkened and he ordered, "Retreat! In front of Wang Ye's procession, there cannot be any infractions." Finishing, he gave a look to the two guardsmen beside him. The two guardsmen walked forward and dragged the woman to throw to one side. Not looking at the woman covered in snow due to being dragged, Qian Xian shook his sleeve. Onward. They even had shamelessness to use such an old scheme. The clothing was normal, but the craftsmanship wasn't average. And the fingers like water onions. Which girl in a normal family didn't do any household chores and could protect her hand to be that tender? Did they think that he, Qian Ye, was blind? After the sedan had continued forward for a distance, He Hung finally allowed Chu Qingju to straighten. He said with a faint smile, "I wonder who would send me such a good gift, but it's just that the presentation needs some work." Hearing the meaning in He Hang's words, Chu Qingju asked in return, "Why so confident it is somebody sending a gift, not this woman wanting to send herself?" The preparation was too good. There could be no such coincidence in this world. If it was a normal person, they would have already hid to one side, not come close to the sedan. He Hang's smile was slightly cold. This person is underestimating Wang Yi. Chu Qingju understood that there wasn't many hero rescuing the damsel in distress in this world. This wasn't a novel or a TV show. No wonder He Hung was so wary. He wasn't a lustful person. A person suddenly rushing out in front, he would naturally be careful. Oh. Seeing the disdain on Chu Qingju's face, He Hung smiled again. He turned to open the window. Looking at the snow floating outside, he suddenly felt that the snowflakes were somewhat beautiful. The two returned to the Wang Fu, and after eating, they slept early. As to this little interruption, Chu Qingju was too lazy to think about it, and He Hung didn't mention it again. On the second morning, the snow had stopped, but the snow on the ground hadn't melted, so it was colder than when it was actually snowing. He Hung stood in the Great Hall and listened to the officials of the court argue over the examinations for next spring, his face expressionless. Both He Qi and He Yuan's people wanted to recommend a person from their side to be chief examiner. The spit flew, and the words flowed without pause. The verbal skills of the literati could be seen clearly. Qing the Emperor, sitting at the top, felt a headache come on due to the argument under him. Seeing He Hung standing and maintaining his silence, he said, "Duan Wang, what do you think?" Picked out by the emperor, He Hung stepped forward, and raising his hands in a greeting he said, "Fu Huang, what the Darren here have said all are reasonable, but Urchin feels there are two others that could fulfill such an important duty. Speak further." Qing the Emperor looked at his eldest son, and then his third son before returning to He Hung. According to Urchin's thinking, the Minister of Defense, Luo Darren and Great Scholar Lu could fill such a position. Both Darren, in their year, were of first rank for their examination, and they are just in their conduct and steadfast. If the two Darren could be examiners, it would be the best fit. He Hung wasn't dumb enough to try to compete for the position of examiner at this time. Fu Huang was old now. He was wary of his young sons. It would be less troublesome if he recommended two of Fu Huang's old subordinates. He Qi and He Yuan hear this and stared at He Hung. What was Lauer thinking? Qing the Emperor's face softened, as though he had heard the answer he wanted. His finger tapped on the armrest of the dragon chair. "This matter will be discussed upon later. Let's break up now." Everybody knew that the Emperor had made his decision and gave 3 calls of 10,000 years while kneeling to bid farewell. After the Emperor had left, each slowly stood and left in small groups. Erji, that was a good idea. He Yuan already understood He Hang's motivation and walked to He Hang's side with a mirthless smile to walk with him. But Didi heard that Luo Darren's daughter is Saw's aunt. Saw and this aunt have a great love for each other. Is that the truth? He Hang's steps slightly paused, and he smiled as he looked at He Yuan. Yu Xiong, too, didn't know when Didi started to be interested in the matters of other families. This matter between womenfolk, it's a matter for women to pay attention to. Yu Xiong doesn't control these things. Hearing the sarcasm in He Heng's words, He Yuan's face didn't look very good. He never really cared for He Heng's conduct of insincere smiles and coldly smirked before retorting. Ge's words are an error. Husband and wife are one being. Mutually paying attention is right. Why distinguish between man and woman? Yu Xiong naturally knows this. He Heng's smile became even softer, but it's probably Didi who doesn't know. He Yuan snorted. When he turned, he saw Lao Da heading towards them and his face instantly darkened. One vinegar is a metaphor for jealousy too. Means stupid, dumb. This is referring to oneself as a stupid elder brother. Chapter 28 Lucky Star D. Sandy, let's walk together. He Chi smiled as he walked in front of the two. I heard that a new restaurant opened in Jing. Why don't us brothers make a visit together? He Yuan sneered. Deji is too polite, but Didi has other matter, and so we'll leave first. Finishing, he flung his sleeve and walked away with a cold face, not even leaving behind a hint of respect for He Chi. This type of encounter had happened more than one. He Chi's expression didn't change as he eyed the back of the figure and said unconcernedly to He Heng, "He's not going, you're coming with Ji?" He Heng smiled and complied. His attitude was casual as he walked together with He Chi. There were no sparks of the struggle for succession between the two. He understood. He Chi might seem upright and honest, but he was definitely one who pretended to be a pig as he eats tigers. The reputation spread that He Yuan had of being arrogant and brash. Half of it could be put on his head. It was just a pity that Lao Dio's mother's birth was too low. This was his greatest challenge in trying to compete for the throne. But the rumor was that the emperor was planning on bestowing the Hogong soon. Nobody knew if he would raise Lao Da's mother's position. Based on the fact that she had Lao Da as an imperial son, she should have been promoted much earlier. It was Lao San's Mu Fei who kept on getting in the way, so that the eldest imperial son's birth mother still only had the title of Chiron. The two came together to the restaurant and left separately after a meal. He Heng didn't manage to experience the taste of the wine and food before Lao Dao had already hinted at his desire to ally with him against Lao San. Returning to the Wang Fu, He Heng found that every servant in the Fu seemed to have cheer on their faces. He couldn't resist asking Ming He, who welcomed him back, "Did something good happen on this Fu?" "Wang Yi, it's just that it's almost the winter holidays. Wang Fei had rewarded some silver to us as servants." Ming He knelt and answered, "Nu Kai forgot ourselves in joy. Wang Yi have mercy. Stand up. Wang Fei has rewarded you all. It's natural for people to be happy." He Heng waved his hand. "What's Wang Fei doing right now?" Just now Nu Kai went to Zheng Yuan to kowtow and express thanks. Wang Fei is probably still there, but Nu Kai doesn't know anything else. Ming He bowed and retreated to one side to express that he had no intentions of inquiring of news about Zheng Yuan. He Heng nodded, his steps changing direction. "Let's go see Zheng Yuan." Stepping into Zheng Yuan, He Heng stopped the servants from announcing him and walked straight into the rooms. Just outside the door, he heard the conversation inside the room. "Wang Fei, this pouch is actually pretty good. Why are you hiding it?" "It's fine. I know you are comforting me. This thing, I can't present it as a gift." "But, what thing you can't gift?" He Heng walked in and saw Chu Qingju try to hide something behind her. He smiled and walked behind her. Taking the object for a look, it was a dark blue pouch. Embroidered on one side was a simple design of clouds. On the other, there was a large character for good fortune. The skill of embroidery really couldn't compare to what he usually used. "Is this for me?" He Heng looked again and again at the pouch and wouldn't return it to Chu Qingju. Seeing the other in a state of awkwardness, "I think it is very good." Chu Qingju coughed. "That is, it's just for amusement. I didn't say it was for you." "Then I am asking for it from you." He Heng jerked the pouch he had on his body off and personally put on this one. He smiled and commented, "This color is pretty good." Chu Qingju glanced at the pouch before instantly moving his gaze. "Since Wang Yi likes it, then use it." Finishing, she turned to ask, "Wang Yi, are you using the night meal here?" He Heng nodded his head. "The hot pot last time was good. Let's have the same tonight." Chu Qingju, who had desired to eat hot pot again, naturally agreed. She felt that it hadn't been a loss to put the effort in. At least now, she could eat good, drink good, and occasionally play at being arrogant. She peeked again at the deep blue pouch and curled her lips. The end of the year was getting closer and closer. The result was that the people at court also became busier. The matter of the examinations had been finally. The chief examiner was the great scholar Liu Jinghong, a member of the Hong Yuan cabinet. This person was one of the two that He Hong had recommended. The deputy examiner was one of He Yuan's people. When the imperial decree came down, He Hong didn't feel any surprise. Fu Huang might be wary of his sons, but he still heavily favored He Yuan overall. Otherwise, why would he keep the position of deputy examiner for him? It was a pity his Fu Huang didn't know that spoiling was a type of harm. He Yuan's appetite would become bigger and bigger under his care. He would definitely create trouble. On the 26th day of the 12th month, a decree came out again from the palace. Many of the consorts were promoted. Ning Wang's birth mother, Tao Shi, was promoted to noble pin. Her title was 1. Both He Yuan and He Heng's mothers took a step forward from Fei to Gui Fei. 2. Just when everybody in Jing was preparing celebratory presents, a decree for marriage came down. Minister Luo's granddaughter was to be married to Qing Wang He Ming. The marriage would take place when spring arrived. When this decree came down, it shocked everybody to the point of seeing stars. They all gave out a lot in congratulatory gifts, and then each raised their heads and stretched their necks to gaze and see the mess that Jing would fall into next year. Chu Qingju finished preparing the gifts to send to the Luo family and Cheng Wangfu. There were also gifts for the consorts who had been promoted inside the palace. She sat down with a cup of tea and let Shu Kuei massage her shoulders, her head revolving around the matter of the Luo family and Cheng Wang. The Luo family was Jumu's maternal family. It wasn't very distinguished, but did have some reputation in the city of Jing. It wasn't a surprise for a girl of the Luo family to marry into the imperial family. But marrying this Cheng Wang, it still couldn't be seen if it was good or bad. If it could be said that the 3 Wang Yi at the front had hope of succeeding the throne, He Ming was just a passerby. Unless the 3 people in front all died, he wouldn't have a hope of reaching the throne. This person's abilities were as average as his name. Who knew how much Qing the Emperor didn't like this son? The 3 sons in front. One had the meaning of the good luck of the Qilin, one was the beauty of jade, one was of profound and deep learning. Each one was of higher quality than the one before. But when it came to Cheng Wang, the brain cells suddenly snapped and the skill of naming dropped. He gave a name that was very common. The meaning was bright, but it wasn't as dignified and noble. Just as well the emperor didn't know of the little student Ming, 3, from the math textbooks of the past life, and how busy it was. He was continuously pouring and catching water, continuously walking from place A to B, continuously riding the bike to deliver apples, continuously going from grandmas to uncles. Thinking about it, Chu Qingju shook her head and said to Mu Jin, "Add half more to the gifts to Cheng Wangfu." Just that name, it was deserving of sympathy. Mu Jin confirmed before asking, "Wang Fei, just now, the Department of Household Affairs sent over the allowance for the year. Newbie has already checked the items against the list. Should the items be entered into the stores?" Even though the items from the Department of Household Affairs weren't rare, but it was still items belonging to the imperial family. This was a matter of honor. Chu Qingju nodded in thinking that after a few days, she had to enter the palace to kowtow and ask for morning greetings. She felt her knees ache. Disregarding the complicated connections and thoughts of the women inside of the palace, just those 2 troublesome Jolie, it was enough to irritate somebody. At the year's end, the Luo family was one of the busiest. The people that sent gifts to the Fu were endless. Even though the daughter of Luo was marrying Cheng Wang, who wasn't favored by the emperor, but he was still a Wang Yi, and the people in the city of Jing had to pay some respect. The elder Luo Taidai flipped through the stacks of gift lists and commented to her daughter-in-law sitting under her. "Oh, Yao Yada married to that kind of place. It is." The wife of the Luo family's eyes reddened slightly as she replied, "The emperor's imperial benevolence is mighty and broad. It is our family's good fortune." Speaking to there, she choked. If she could choose, she would that her daughter married into a normal official's family rather than suffer in the imperial family. Erxi heard that Cheng Wang is kind and honest. When Yaoer marries, she most likely wouldn't suffer much. Each person has to live their own life. The elder Luo Taidai placed the gift list down. Duan Wangfu isn't as easy as Cheng Wangfu, but that girl from the Chu family is living well. Duan Wang treats her very well. In the past, our Luo family has treated Duan Wang Fei well. When Yaoer marries, there's some measure of protection. But Duan Wang and Cheng Wang, the worries of the wife of the Luo family, hadn't finished being said before the elder Luo Taidai interrupted. Relationships between women have always been between women, the elder Luo Taidai said in a meaningful tone. Anything else is the matter of men. Our Luo family will only be loyal to the emperor. The Luo Erxi nodded in a gaze. She was going to speak when she heard the servant report that Duan Wangfu had sent gifts over. When the list was delivered over, the elder Luo Taidai took the list before nodding and commenting. Duan Wangfei is very good to our Luo family. We should increase the year-end gifts we send over. Finishing, she gave the list to her Erxi. The Luo Erxi took the list and thought in relief that it was lucky that the Luo family had been kind to Duan Wangfei, and Duan Wangfei also knew to pay back. When she entered the imperial family, Yaori will have somebody to guide her. And if Duan Wang succeeded the throne, she quickly shook her head and suppressed the idea. In Rue Wangfu, He Yuan smashed many pieces of pottery. His beautiful face was full of darkness. Is Fu Huang dim-witted to marry one of the Luo family to Lao Asai? Isn't this clearly pushing the Luo family and Lao Asai towards Laoer? The Taijian serving him heard this and shuddered in fear. He quickly knelt on the floor, pieces of broken pottery cutting into his knees. He didn't dare frown even a bit. Wang Yi, Wang Fei requests to see you. A young Yahuan stood shakily at the doorway, afraid to even look at He Yuan. Not now. Smashing another piece of porcelain, He Yuan sat down on the carved sandalwood chair. After musing with a dark face, he ordered, "Come, prepare a carriage to enter the palace." Damn it. If he had known it would be like this, he shouldn't have in the beginning pushed Mu Fei into letting Fu Huang bestow marriage between the member of the family Chu and Laoer. Now it was a boon for him. As the clear winner in He Yuan's eyes, He Hung wasn't as joyful as He Yuan imagined because he knew the conduct of the Luo family. As to how Lao Asai would choose, that remained to be seen. Holding a cup of Longjing tea and leaning back on the chair with half-lidded eyes, He Hung thought about He Yuan and He Chi's possible reactions. He Hung raised and lowered his eyebrow. No matter what, this incident was advantageous for him. But this was also time to pass the news that He Yuan was giving loans to Lauda. As long as the two of them were fighting, they wouldn't care about Lao Si's marriage. That was, in their eyes, Lao Asai wasn't that important. Wang Yi, Wang Fei sent somebody with chicken soup. Ming He's voice sounded from outside the door. Looking at the chicken soup in front of him, He Hung suddenly thought of Chu Qingju. Fu Huang's imperial decree said that she was of plentiful good fortune. It wasn't wrong. Wang Fei was really his lucky star. 1. Warm, tender, soft, gentle. 2. A position above Fei. Means valued or noble. 3. It's akin to John /N. Chapter 29. Yunqing's tragedy. On the 28th day of the 12th month, the royal court seals its pins and the palace started to bestow gifts into the households. Most that received gifts were officials and noble families of some significance in the city of Jing. Therefore, the absence and presence of gifts from the emperor represented the emperor's favor. Lower-ranked officials that wanted to climb up kept their gazes tightly locked to see which houses they could curry favor with, which houses they could find a way in. Chu Qingju followed He Hong and knelt in the front hall of the Wang Fu to receive the emperor's gifts. It was just a couplet for the spring festival that the emperor wrote personally, a good fortune, character, and 2 plates of golden yellow kumquats. Kumquats had the meaning of luck, and it was a good beginning. Bidding farewell to the Taijian that passed on the decree, the two returned to Zhengyuan and opened the spring festival couplet. It was gold on red paper, with flowers on the border. Based on Chu Qingju's inexpert opinion, the characters were very good-looking, but from the strokes, Qing de Emperor's characters was more soft and bold, revealing his personality. Casually tearing open a kumquat that was about the size of a thumb, Chu Qingju fed half into her own mouth and fed He Hung the other. She nodded and commented, "Good characters, the kumquats are sweet, too." He Hung looked at her stream of actions and smiled as he placed the couplets down. Qianchang Xian, You and Ming He go personally put the Spring Festival couplets up? Yes. Qian Chong Xian carefully bore the plate with the couplets on it and retreated with Ming He. Chu Qingju looked at the pair of good fortune characters. Then where do we put these two characters? In our rooms, naturally. I'll put it up later. He Hung pointed to the gate of Zhengfang and saw that Chu Qingju had started on another kumquat. It's very cold. Don't eat too much cold food. Chu Qingju's wrist bent and shoved the kumquat in her hand to him. Since Wang Yi is personally putting up the characters, then I will help you see if it is skewed. Finishing, she took the characters and started to order the servants to bring the tools to paste the paper. He Hung saw her enthusiasm and allowed her to proceed. Under the protection of a few Taijian, he stepped on a stool to put up the good fortune character. It's tilted. Move a bit towards the right. Move right. Too much. A little bit to the left. Move left. Chu Qingju looked with a bit of dissatisfaction at He Heng's results and reluctantly nodded. More or less this is good. The Taijian heard this and guided Wang Yi to step down the stool. They dragged the stool as they retreated to the side to not affect the little amusement between Wang Yi and Wang Fei. He Hung walked back a few steps and nodded in satisfaction. He then lifted his head to tap Chu Qingju's forehead. I think you are terrible at directing. Chu Qingju went back a step and teased. It's Wang Yi whose skills aren't high. How can you blame me? Not far away, Jiang Yongyu, accompanied by the three Shirchia, stood and watched the antics between Wang Yi and Wang Fei. They didn't know whether they should leave or stay. Originally, she had come with the others to thank Wang Fei for the hairpins Wang Fei had bestowed down today, but looking at the scene before her, she wasn't so thoughtless to interrupt. The other three didn't feel at ease either, but didn't dare show any of it on their faces. They all looked at Jiang Yongyu for her response. It's fine. We can come tomorrow. Wang Yi and Wang Fei are busy now. Jiang Yongyu looked away and was going to turn around, but they suddenly met Yin Lu, who was carrying a meal box. Greetings to Jiang Si Fei and Yin Yang. Yin Lu bowed. Yin Lu Gunyang doesn't have to be so courteous. Jiang Yongyu smiled. We thought to give thanks to Wang Fei, but hadn't known that Wang Yi and Wang Fei are busy. We shan't interrupt and will leave first. Before Yin Lu could reply, they saw Yuzan quickly walk over and bow to the procession of four. Jiang Si Fei and Yin Yang. Wang Yi and Wang Fei invite you in. It had been that Chu Qingju saw the movements on this side and sent somebody to call them over. In the front room, He Hong and Chu Qingju sat at the front, the four sure sitting quietly and obediently under them. Chu Qingju glanced at Feng Zijin. Just half a month, Feng Zijin seemed more fragile than before. Sitting there, she seemed akin to a statue without any hint of life. She took a small mouthful of tea before opening. For what matter are you here? Today, us sisters received Wang Fei's gifts and felt grateful, so we thought to come to give thanks. Jiang Yongyu replied. We disturbed Wang Fei and asked for Wang Fei's forgiveness. You are too polite. Chu Qingju set down the teacup. A good flower needs a good vase. Those ornaments and hairpins need to accompany beauties to shine. I was just making sure good things didn't go to waste. It wasn't worth you making a trip. Jiang Yongyu smiled and said, even though Wang Fei says so, but Nu still is grateful. If there wasn't Wang Fei, Nu wouldn't have such good things. Finishing, she touched the hairpin on the side of her head. Apparently, it was one of the hairpins that Chu Qingju gave. He Hung noticed her movement and interjected. Wang Fei's kindness, you only have to bow and give thanks. Finishing, he laughed at Chu Qingju. No wonder you ordered the servants to make hairpins and ornaments. So it was for this? Chu Qingju didn't have any desire to purposefully act virtuous and kind in front of He Hung. It was the end of the year, and she wanted to make it pleasing to her eyes. Either way, she wasn't spending her own money, so why should she save? Now that Wang Yi had spoken, Jiang Yongyu couldn't continue and could only sit silently by the side drinking tea to waste time. At this time, Huang Yang walked in. After a bow, he reported, Wang Yi, Wang Fei, Yun Qing Gunyang asks for an audience. He Hung furrowed his brows slightly, visibly irate. She's a Tongfang. What matter does she need to ask Wang Fei for? These words were very discourteous. Huang Yang, the messenger, slightly froze. Wang Yi, Yun Qing Gunyang said she was grateful for the care Wang Fei has given her and wanted to bow in thanks. Huang Yang replied obediently. Get her to just kowtow at the door. He hung opened. Tell her that Wang Fei is a busy person most days. If there aren't any important matters, then she should stay in her own rooms. He was sick of the entire act Yunqing had. First it was Virtuous, and then it was playing pitiful. What was the act she's playing now called? This type of woman, no matter if attention was paid to her or not, would always find all the excuses possible, and in all possible ways appear. He played with the teacup in his hand. Never mind. In the next days, get somebody to send her to one of the estates outside. Ben Wang doesn't want to see her. The other sure at this time buried their heads deep down, afraid that Wang Yi would find them an eyesore as well. Letting them go to the outside estates, if the people in this fu were sent away, there wasn't a good change they would return. They didn't know how Yunqing managed to provoke Wang Yi into disliking her. What they did understand was that they should never ever offend Wang Fei. Before them was the lesson of Yunqing. Behind them was the example of Feng Zijin. They didn't dare have any other thoughts. Wang Yi, this Yunqing is a very young girl. Sending her to an estate like this, it is such as waste. Chu Qingju felt it was a great pity, such a young and beautiful girl. He looked at her face full of regret and said helplessly, just a woman, but you care more than I do. If that's the case, we'll find a match for her on the estate, so she wouldn't be alone and without support. Chu Qingju knew that the so-called Tongfang was nothing more than a man's plaything, and turning to match them to a manservant was normal. In this case, Wang Yi hadn't even touched this Yunqing and didn't have any possessive feelings. But a Huakue, skilled in all 4 major arts, matched to a rough person, it was very wasteful. If Yunqing was really of great virtue, she should turn and hang herself. If not, she could make a living on the estate. It most likely would be better than losing her life in the future. The other Shirchia heard how Wang Fei, using just a few words, let Wang Yi marry Yunqing to a rough person. Their hearts shook, especially Feng Zijin. Sweat started to form on her hands. If it was just being sent to an estate, there could be a day where Wang Yi would go to the estate and place importance on her again, so there was a hope of return. If it was marrying another person, she could only live the rest of her life with a rough person. To those who were used to an easy and luxurious life, this was very frightening. When Yunqing heard this news that appeared like thunder out of a clear sky, she went crazy begging to see Yi Heng. However, she was pushed down by the Taijian, and on the same night, she could only take a small bag and was forced onto a donkey cart to a property in the suburbs. They traveled through the night, and she was married to one of the minor stewards on the property. A woman being sent away, to those of the Wang Fu, was a very normal occurrence. The only thing worth discussing was how this Yunqing Gunyang was, how virtuous she had been, and how much importance Wang Yi had once placed on her, and how she had looked down on the servants. She deserves to be sent away. A young Taijian that hand suffered slaps from Yunqing's spat. He thought about how his ear was not as good as before, and the Taijian wanted Yunqing's life. The other servants looked at him in sympathy. This person's luck wasn't good. When he had been sweeping Yunqing's room and cleaning the guqin, he had broken a string on the instrument. As a result, he had been punished with tens of blows to the face. Now his ears weren't very good, and what person was willing to use him? It was going to be hard for him to climb up in the future. The day of the spring festival, Chu Qingju rose up early. She changed on a thick, lawn-embroidered, tight-waisted, wide-sleeve dress. In her hair, she had a phoenix tail buyao that represented her status. After a period, she looked at the eye-catching and radiant self and revealed a hint of satisfaction. She put out her foot to let Mujin put on for her a pair of god-threaded shoes embroidered with clouds. When she stood, she saw Yi Heng was already standing at the doorway. Yi Heng's entire body exuded nobility. The only thing slightly low-key was that dark blue pouch. Chu Qingju came up and bowed. Is Wang Yi waiting especially for me? Yi Heng held her hand. Qingju today has shocked me. Chu Qingju rarely put on such attire. But today when she put on the whole 9 yards, Yi Heng really couldn't tear his eyes away. Slightly raising her chin, the jewel at the forehead slightly swaying and revealing the cherry blossom drawn in the middle of the brows. As Duan Wang Fei, naturally others should not be unimpressed. Yi Heng curled his lips and bent down to hold her hand. He slid next to her ear to breathe lightly. My Wang Fei, She is naturally more beautiful than any other woman. Chu Qingju smiled and blinked at him. Inside she thought, these words he wouldn't dare say to Jing Guifei, otherwise, Jing Guifei would whip him to death. Thinking that later in the palace, she would see her popo that had become a Guifei, Chu Qingju felt a strange excitement. The expression Jing Guifei made when she was choked up and was still pretending to be calm, it was such a lovable expression. Thinking about it, Chu Qingju revealed an expectant smile. As he lowered his head and saw the bashful smile on Chu Qingju's face, He Heng's expression became even gentler. Chapter 30. To be partial even though the palace banquet was to be happening at night. But Chu Qingju and He Heng needed to kowtow to the emperor and empress, so they rose early. The relationship between the imperial couple wasn't good, but today, the two of them actually sat together. Chu Qingju and He Heng traveled to the emperor's residence of Tianqi Palace. 1. When the Taijian ushered them in, they saw the married couple of He Qi and Wei Qingyi already situated on the chairs. He Heng went forward a few steps and pulled Chu Qingju to kneel in front of the imperial couple. Heir Qian and Wang Fei wishes Fu Huang and Muhu a good new year. Finishing, he held up a sandalwood box with both hands, that the 3 stars, 2 of luck, good fortune, and long life accompany Fu Huang always, and good fortune for the world. Qing the emperor took the sandalwood box and saw the carvings of the 3 stars inside. He smiled and said, "Hunger and your wife, stand up." When a person became old, the thing desired most was luck and long life. This good fortune also had a second meaning of status, and it matched Qing the emperor's desires, so his smile became a fraction softer. "You two sit down." Finishing, he ordered the Taijian to move 2 chairs for the two. This was the first time Chu Qingju met the emperor. Making use of the motion of sitting down, she took a peek at the other. The emperor's appearance was average compared to his son's, his body softer and heavier. Between his brows, there was tiredness and old age. No wonder his sons all had other ideas. De Ji came so early. He Heng, after he sat, raised his hands in a greeting to He Qi and smiled. Didi greets Gij. Heir Di came early too. He Qi gave a bright smile and then looked at the emperor. Seeing the emperor was still looking at what Lao Eri had given him, he said, "Fu Huang, this year the treasury is very rich." Heir Chun heard that the storytellers in the tea shops and restaurants have been praising Fu Huang for your benevolence. I don't know if Fu Huang had heard it. Qing the emperor heard those words and closed the box in his hands. He placed it to one side and looked at He Qi. "You're such a child. Still running to the shops. There's nothing worth in hearing these things. Fu Huang, please forgive me. Heir Chen's words may slightly offend you. Heir Chen feels that most of the public are honest and dutiful. If they say you are benevolent, it naturally comes from the heart." When Chen heard this, Chen was secretly happy. He Qi straightened his neck, looking as though he had to explain. Heir Chen cannot be like Fu Huang and not place any importance on the reputation. But since they were complimenting you, Chen couldn't help but feel happy. This bootlicking was really well done. Chu Qingju though silently. Ning Wang appeared to speak straightforwardly, but it was too pleasing to the ear. Look how happy the emperor was. Even his laugh was pitched a few notes higher. De Ji, really? You already knew that Fu Huang doesn't like hearing this, but you still said it? He Heng complained. Not just this year. In the past there have been many citizens that said Fu Huang was benevolent and a good ruler. I didn't dare tell Fu Huang and just felt happy in secret. He Qi heard this and started to swear on the inside. This Lao was too good at following up. What he just did with his words. He pushed Fu Huang even higher and underneath. He criticized him for only finding out this year. Wasn't this digging a hole for him? After hearing He Heng's words, Qing the emperor's smile became even happier. After a few sounds, he turned and said to the empress, "Look at these kids, they don't look like Wang Yi at all. To be so happy over such a little thing, people would laugh at them." The empress gave a fitting smile and with a tone that said she felt unjust on behalf of the two. "Emperor, these 2 children are full of filial love. When they hear others praise their father, they naturally are happy. How can you call their love childish? Chia will call it unjust for these 2 children." Chu Qingju stole a glance at He Heng, who was next to her. This person was good with words, understood the hearts of people, and his personality was steady. This type of man, wherever you put him, he would be a successful person. So the likelihood that he could become emperor wasn't small. Thinking that in the future, after he succeeded the throne and her possible fates, Chu Qingju felt that before he would success the throne, she would enjoy everything. Even though the separation between the sexes in the Delong dynasty wasn't as serious as the Ming and Qing dynasties in history, but Chu Qingju was very perceptive and kept her head down. Even if she did raise her eyes, it was in the direction of the Empress and Wei Qingyi. During one of the times she casually raised her head, she found Wei Qingyi was also looking at her, and in the other's expression, it held a certain disdain and sympathy for her. Chu Qingju, who felt very strange at seeing such emotions, paused for a while. Just at the same time, the rumored little student Ming came in. She finally found some interest in sitting here. She wanted to see how this child that had been overlooked by his father looked like. Quickly scanning the blue-clad He Ming, she found he wasn't as masculine as He Qi, not as warm and gentle as He Hong, and not as beautiful as He Yuan. He looked very normal, but could be considered a handsome little fellow. Looking at his sincere greeting before sitting down, Chu Qingju felt a bit sad. Such a good baby, such a pity he met such a bad father. Seeing that Lao Asai had arrived but Lao San, who he favored the most, hadn't arrived, the smile on Qing de Emperor's face became fainter and fainter. And the three brothers present, as though they had planned it, didn't try to amuse the Emperor anymore, each becoming silent. After sitting for close to 15 minutes, when the smile on Qing de Emperor's face had disappeared, He Yuan finally arrived. Chu Qingju saw how he, with just a few words, made Qing de Emperor smile and laugh, and understood what it meant to have a heart that deviated until it was at the armpit. 4. Watching as Qing de Emperor cheerfully put on the Buddhist beads that He Yuan gave onto his wrist, He Hong calmly took a drink of tea. He Qi jerked his mouth to one side. He Ming sat silently. The expressions of the three, it was proof that they were used to this occurring commonly, that they didn't even have any jealousy left. Chu Qingju felt grief on behalf of the emperor. Maybe he didn't know yet that his other three sons didn't have any feelings left for him, because if they did feel anything, they wouldn't be so calm seeing what occurred. On the other hand, it was more tragic for the three imperial sons. Having such a father, it was a great misfortune. Not giving them any love, and being partial to only one child and pretending they didn't exist. A short while later, the three brothers were ushered out under the excuse of greeting their mother consorts. Only He Yuan was left sitting there. The contrast became even more obvious. No wonder He Yuan was so arrogant. Chu Qingju walked with Wei Qingyi. After the plum blossom banquet, they hadn't seen each other again. This time, the two both had warm smiles on their faces. Daimai, your life has been good lately. I heard a rude person had been married into an estate a few days earlier from the Fu. Wei Qingyi asked with a faint smile. I heard it from San Daimai. Not sure if it is true or not. Just an ignorant Yahuan. Originally, it was just sending her away, but I couldn't bear seeing her so young and without a support, so I appealed to Wang Yi that it was good to marry her off. Chu Qingju gave an unburdened smile. These minor things, I wonder where San Daimai heard it. Daimai is too kind. This kind of disobedient servants, you should just sell them. There's no need to think more for them. Wei Qingyi jerked her lips. As to how San Daimai know, I don't know either. There is nothing that can't be said. It was probably San Daimai's concern for me. Chu Qingju smiled as she rubbed at her earring. She gave a sweet smile. As to sending off this person, it was Wang Ye's desire. I was fine either way. Wei Qingyi suddenly felt that this smile was blinding to her eyes. Seeing that her own Wang Yi was bidding farewell to Duan Wang Yi, she said in a regretful voice, It looks like I will have to part with Daimai here. We'll meet again at the banquet. Walk carefully, Saw. Chu Qingju cheerfully bowed and bid farewell. After Wei Qingyi walked alongside He Qi, she then walked to He Heng's side. They were all muddling along in this profession called Wang Fei, who didn't know how to make others choke. He Hong knew that Chu Qingju had been conserving with Dasa just earlier, but as a man, he wasn't interested in the topics of women and didn't listen carefully. Seeing the smile on Chu Qingju's face, He didn't ask, but slowed his steps to match Chu Qingju's as they walked forward. When they reached Jing Guifei's Zhongjing Palace, before they even entered, Chu Qingju first heard the laughter of a young female. The palace maids wouldn't dare laugh like this. The imperial concubines wouldn't laugh like this. It looked like it was somebody that Jing Guifei was familiar with. When they walked into the room, Chu Qingju, as expected, saw a female standing behind Jing Guifei. As she massaged Jing Guifei's shoulders, she joked to amuse Jing Guifei. Then she saw that this female's eyes fly over to He Hong. Jing Guifei saw He Hong, and the smile on her face became more visible. After the two performed their greetings, she let them sit and asked a few questions about He Hong's living conditions. She then turned and said to Chu Qingju, "Erxifu, you might not know this Yatu. She is Bin Gong's maternal family's cousin's daughter. Ranshuang, come greet your Gij and Saozi." Ranshuang greets Gij, greets Sa. Wei Ranshuang moved with ease and with a shy smile. She bowed in front of the two. She then retreated with a blush to one side, but her gaze still sneakily remained on He Hong's figure. "So you are my Wang Ye's Mimi. I didn't know you would be here today, and didn't prepare any gifts." Finishing, she took down the jade bangle on her wrist and stood to walk in front of Wei Ranshuang. She took the other's hand, and after personally putting the bangle on, she said, "This was a piece that my mother left for me. Even though it isn't very famous, but its color is good and I hope Mimi won't dislike it." Chu Qingju knew that Jing Guifei's surname was Wei. Her father had been the Tai Bao V, when the present emperor had been crown prince. The present Wei Daren still carried the title of Tai Bao, but had no real power. Wei Daren had a younger brother who was a fifth-rank provincial governor. In all these years, he hadn't made any real progress. Right now, when Jing Guifei was calling Wei Ranshuang her cousin's daughter, it was just to disguise Wei Ranshuang to look better. Wasn't she really just a fifth-grade local-level official's granddaughter? Since this way Ranshuang had the guts to call her Sa, then she would happily accept it. Ranshuang doesn't dare take Saoseo's things. Wei Ranshuang wanted to take off the bangle, but her hand was pulled by Chu Qingju. "You are Wang Ye's Mimi, then you are my Mimi. We shan't be so courteous." Finishing, she looked in confusion at Jing Guifei. "Mu Fei, Mimi didn't live in Jing before, did she? Otherwise, such a beautiful mame. How come I haven't seen her before?" Jing Guifei looked at how Chu Qingju had stopped her niece and smiled faintly. Her father had held a post elsewhere. They have returned to the city just recently. No wonder. Chu Qingju smiled as she pulled Wei Ranshuang to sit beside her. "Now that Mimi has returned to Jing, then I have another sibling in the future to play with." Jing Guifei looked at Chu Qingju's enthusiasm and felt her heart hurt. Did her Erxifu not even think about the meaning of her leading this person here? Her cousin was only a little sixth-grade official now that he transferred back to Jing City. Even if she did have the desire to promote him, even if Ranshuang would marry someone of a good family, she wouldn't be able to hold her hand up. So she wanted to let her son see this Yatu. If he liked her, then she wouldn't be done a disservice in the future. If he didn't like her, then it was just letting cousins meet. Also, she actually didn't really want her niece to be a chia of her son. Seeing that her son didn't even look once at her niece, Jing Guifei knew it wasn't going to happen. She turned to look at Chu Qingju, and her expression almost broke. What was she doing holding Wei Yatu's hand and not letting go? What did she mean? Mimi's skin is so good. It's so smooth to the touch. Chu Qingju had a face of envy. I can see that the place Mimi lived in was better than Jing City. Finishing, she actually smiled and rubbed that tender and white hand. Jing Guifei felt it. Where did her Erxifu's brains go? Didn't she have a sense of danger? Didn't she know to be wary of other women? Complimenting another woman's skin in front of her own husband, was it to arouse curiosity in her husband? For no apparent reason, when she looked at Chu Qingju's joyful smile, Jing Guifei felt helpless and fretful. She turned to look at her son and saw her son smile as he savored his tea with no hint of response. She could only say, "Hunger, in a few days, your second uncle will visit you. Find a time to meet him." He Hung knew his mother's intentions and nodded lightly. He answered, "Chen understands." Finishing, he pushed a plate of kumquats beside him in the direction that Chu Qingju was sitting in. Jing Guifei saw his movement but didn't say anything. But when she looked at Chu Qingju, she felt her heart was even more fretful. 1 is sky. Heaven is open, start, to enlighten. This palace could be called the Palace of Heavenly Enlightenment. However, in modern times also means apocalypse. 2. The 3 stars are is luck or good fortune, is good fortune, but also means the salary an official receives is long life. 3. The word used here rather than world is, which means the world, land under heaven, and China as a country. Due to the pseudo-alternate world nature of this novel, China doesn't exist, and the novel states later that the surrounding countries pay tribute to the emperor, hence the world, rather than just the country. 4. The idiom for favoring is usually, which literally means slanted, deviating heart. 5. Grand tutor /n. Chapter 31 of Another's Family. During the noon meal, Chu Qingju and He Hong sat on either side of Jing Guifei. The palace maids carried trays and like a school of fish and served them as they washed and dried their hands. Jing Guifei might have had the intentions to elevate Wei Ranshuang, but due to Wei Ranshuang's status, she couldn't sit with the 3 of them. Chu Qingju looked at Wei Ranshuang as she stood being Jing Guifei. This Wei Mimi that returned from outside to Jing City had a good appearance, innocent and clean. Her manner as she obediently stood behind Jing Guifei was also very attractive. It was just in this kind of ancient era that it was very likely for cousins to get together. Chu Qingju stole a look at He Hong and guessed as to whether if he had any desire. Taking the handkerchief that a palace maid handed over, Chu Qingju's gaze scanned over He Hong. The other person didn't seem to have any interest in Wei Ranshuang. She smiled and watched as dish after dish was brought in. After the noon meal, Wei Ranshuang accompanied Jing Guifei as she returned to the inner rooms for a short rest. Chu Qingju and He Hong went to one of the side rooms. There was a full set of furniture and other essentials in the side room. Chu Qingju even managed to see that a page of awkwardly written characters hanging on the wall. It looked like the writings of a young child. He Hong saw Chu Qingju was looking at the words and coughed before explaining. This was the room I lived in when I was young and lived with Mu Fei. Only after I was 6 did I move to the side hall. When I was 10, I moved to my own palace. Chu Qingju looked at the date under the characters, the 17th year of Qingda. At that time, He Hong would have only been 5 years old. She took her gaze back and smiled. Wang Ye's talents are above others. From such a set of characters, Qingju can see talent above others. It's your kin that are above others. He Hong smiled and sat down on the bed. Come rest for a while on the bed. It will be very late tonight before we can return back to our fu. Chu Qingju, under the service of servants, took down the hair ornaments and the decorated outer robe. After everyone had left the room, she crisply sat down on the bed. She stared at him and said, "If my kin aren't good, I wouldn't have fallen for Wang Yi." To this kind of response, he couldn't help but laugh. He Hong had to admit he liked hearing this. In the end, he could only press the person onto the bed. "You married me because Fu Huang decreed married. How was it you fell for me?" Chu Qingju wrapped the blanket around her and muttered, "Fell later, then?" He Hong looked at the person who had buried her head into the blankets. The corners of his lips couldn't help but curl up, his eyes unconsciously becoming softer. The nap that Jing Guifei took at noon wasn't long. It wasn't a bit more than an hour when she woke. She stood from the bed and looked at Wei Ranshuang, who stood to one side, allowing the palace maids to put on the clothing and adornments needed for the evening banquet. Seeing Wei Ranshuang come forward to help style her hair, Jing Guifei stopped her. Looking at herself in the mirror and the lingering traces of beauty, Jing Guifei asked in a cool tone, "Ranshuang, do you know why Bin Gong let you enter the palace?" Wei Ranshuang had never interacted with Jing Guifei for a long length of time, so when she heard Jing Guifei ask this, she became nervous. She answered with a bit of embarrassment, "Niece doesn't know." Picking out a peach blossom hairpin made from rubies out of boxes of ornaments, Jing Guifei said with a calm expression, "I suppose that before you entered the palace, your mother had already said a lot to you. But some things Bin Gong has to say clearly to you. Duan Wang is an adult. Bin Gong cannot make his decisions for him, and doesn't want to force him into accepting any decisions. Lay rest to your wishes now." Wei Ranshuang paled and she gripped her fingers together for a beat before whispering, "Gumu, I don't ask for much. I just want to remain at Biao Ji's side. Finishing, her face became red. Hearing this, Jing Guifei smiled, whether in disdain or something else. She raised an eyebrow as she looked at the young girl standing at her side. You've just seen hunger for just this little while, and you want to spend your entire life with him? Young girls were easily influenced by a man's status, appearance, and conduct. They didn't care what his personality was like, how his family was. They thought it was true love and would rush in. As to the end result, they would never think about it. Wei Ranshuang's face became even more flushed and buried her head slightly, not rejecting Jing Guifei's words. Then what do you think about Duan Wangfei? When Jing Guifei mentioned her Erxifu, she felt her temple throb. Duan Wangfei is more beautiful than any other. Wei Ranshuang bit her lips and squeezed out, I don't want to compete with Wangfei and doesn't dare to. You can't compete with her? Jing Guifei personally drew her eyebrows, and she was merciless when she looked at Wei Ranshuang again. I don't want you to become a Cheshire. If you are willing, I will definitely find you a good family. Her Erxifu might not be what she wanted, but she had to admit that her niece couldn't even compare to Chu Qingju. Appearance, family, composure, conduct, and even the special traits that aroused interest and affection in men. Wei Ranshuang was drastically weaker than Chu Qingju. As a Xie, she had nothing that could outcompete the wife. What would she use to compete for a man's favor? Wei Ranshuang's face became even paler, but she refused to speak. Jing Guifei looked at her state and furrowed her eyebrows. She didn't speak further. Plainly speaking, it wasn't her actual brother's daughter. Since the other wouldn't listen to her persuasions, she was lazy to speak more. Coming out of the inner room, Jing Guifei saw that no one was in the outer room and asked, Have they not risen yet? Ding Mama knew who Nyang Yang was asking for and responded. It probably was that Wang Yi and Wang Fei would have risen early today and be tired. They haven't risen. Newbie will go now to summon them. That's fine. Let them sleep. I don't know how late this will go tonight. Jing Guifei waved her hand and took a drink of tea to help her focus. That woman, Shu Guifei, is most likely going to be troubling Bin Gong again tonight. Make sure that everybody who is accompanying Bin Gong tonight to the banquet to be careful. Ding Mama confirmed. Her Nyang Yang had been locked in struggle with Shu Guifei for many years. After so long, they held a mutual hate. Thankfully, Wang Yi was a good child. Otherwise, based on how the emperor favored only Shu Guifei, Nyang Yang would have been at a disadvantage. As the two were talking, they saw He Hong and Chu Qingju walk in holding hands. Jing Guifei stopped the topic and saw her Erxifu looked at her with amazement. She felt very satisfied and opened. You've just woken, drink some tea to wake up. After a bit, use some refreshments. At this type of banquet, the tendency was to go hungry. Chu Qingju understood, and after she took a drink of tea, she complimented. Mu Fei's dress is very beautiful. Because the other's compliment was too straightforward and unskilled, Jing Guifei held a teacup and explained. This dress was specially made by the clothing department. It took many days. It's natural it wouldn't be bad looking. Other families' Erxifu speaks in twists and turns. Their compliments were classic and literary. But why was it that when it came to her, it was such a bare sentence? Even the desire to show off was halved. Jing Guifei signaled that she wasn't happy. Wei Ranshuang saw the situation and came forward to exchange Jing Guifei's tea for a hotter one. She smiled. The cranes on Aunt's dress are as though they came from heaven. I wonder how they embroidered it. At one glance, one can't tear their gaze away. Look at her, look. Jing Guifei glanced at Chu Qingju and held the new cup of tea. She smiled and declared, the things that Bin Gong wants them to make, they naturally will make it well. Otherwise, there's no use in keeping them. Gomu is of high status. They wouldn't dare do you a disservice. When Wei Ranshuang finished, she said to Chu Qingju, the craftsman on Cao Seo's dress is also very skilled. It must have also taken many days. Chu Qingju squinted her eyes in a smile as she looked at Wei Ranshuang. Us members of the imperial family, we do have to take more care at these times. Her good cousin wasn't a pure, harmless little white bunny. Wei Ranshuang's smile dimmed slightly. Yes, people like me, we don't get to use these things. That's true. Chu Qingju nodded. Girls like you, it doesn't matter what you wear. There's no need to take a lot of care. Her face dimming. Wei Ran Shuang felt that the matter-of-fact tone of the other made her heart feel as though it was blocked. A beat later, she forced a smile and said, Sa Sa has a noble status, and naturally has to take more care. There's no way around it. I can't shame my Wang Yi now. Chu Qingju sighed in helplessness and turned towards He Hung. Right, Wang Yi? He Hung nodded, and without looking at Wei Ranshuang, he admitted. You are right. A man with ability. Usually they wouldn't care how much women spent and how valuable was what she wore. There were only two types of men that criticized women for being extravagant. One type was the type that had no ability. The other type was he had a change of heart. Chu Qingju didn't know if He Hung had a heart, but she did know that He Hung was very able. Seeing the interactions between the two, the dimness on Wei Ranshuang's face became more real, but she had no way of saying something else. She could only force a smile and comment, Gidge and Sa Sa have such a good relationship. He Hung slowly followed with this. I and your Sa Sa are husband and wife. We naturally have good feelings for each other. Wei Ranshuang didn't speak again. Jing Guifei looked calmly at this scene and put the teacup in her hand to one side. She motioned for Ding Mama to change her cup before announcing, the kitchen should have finished making the refreshments now. Ben Gong will let them serve it. Erxifu, when we get to the banquet later, don't drink too much. If she had to leave in the middle of the banquet, it would shame her. Chu Qingju nodded. Erxifu will remember. Thanks, Mu Fei, for the reminder. Finishing, she gave a grateful look of Mu Fei. You are such a good person. Jing Guifei jerked her lips and felt that she didn't want to talk to her again. When the sky darkened, Jing Guifei finally opened again. Hunger, you go to the front hall. Ben Gong will take Erxifu to the rear hall. He Hung stood and performed a greeting. He gave Chu Qingju a reassuring look before he walked out the door of Zhongjing Palace. Let's go, Erxifu. Jing Guifei touched the buyao inserted in her hair as she stood. Later, follow Ben Gong and don't speak freely. She kept on feeling if she didn't give a few more warnings, she would be too worried. Chu Qingju came up to hold her hand and smiled. She affirmed, Erxi knows, /n. Chapter 32. At the banquet, the imperial banquets of the Long Dynasty were always set in Zhaoyang Great Hall. Therefore, the entire hall was very large. Even the decorations were full of grandeur, carrying the intimidation and prestige of the imperial family. In the very front of the hall, there was a gold-inlaid dragon and phoenix sandalwood table. Underneath that on the right and left was a row of 8-person square tables. When Chu Qingju walked into the Great Hall, she found that everyone sitting on the left side was male and the right side was filled with women. On the first table on the right, there were already people seated. Chu Qingju examined them. Both Wei Qingyi and Qin Bailu were each accompanying a beautiful woman. These two must be Shu Guifei and Wen Guipin. The pretty woman sitting beside them in plainer attire must be Cheng Wang's birth mother and Guipin. Jing Guifei carried a smile as she walked forward and allowed Chu Qingju to hold her to sit down on the seat beside Shu Guifei. She pointed to the spot next to her. Erxifu, sit down too. Chu Qingju smiled and bowed to the others. She addressed the others present. Greetings to Shu Guifei, and Guipin, Wen Guipin. And Guipin was Cheng Wang's birth mother and looked like a very gentle woman. She looked similar to her neighbor, Wen Guipin, but Chu Qingju found that Guipin had a very warm visage overall. Unlike the warm exterior of Wen Guipin, Lauer's wife doesn't have to be so courteous. Sit down, Shu Guifei smiled. You became sick not long after you married, so Ben Gong hadn't seen you close up before. Now that I've seen you, I understand. Such a good Erxifu. No wonder Jiejia has hidden you all this time and not let you out. When Jing Guifei heard this, her eyebrow twitched and she gave a thin smile. She divulged sarcastically, Ben Gong's Erxifu doesn't like going out all the time. Ben Gong can't do anything about it. She's just dull, not like your Lao Sans. Mimi, don't tease her. She had an Erxifu that liked fluttering about and joins in everything. She dared to criticize her Erxifu. She should look at herself first. Wanting to pick at the relationship between her and Erxifu wasn't that easy. The smile on Shu Guifei's face became uglier by a few fractions. She glanced at Qin Bailu, who was sitting beside her, and, with a mirthless smile, she replied, Jejia is too funny. They all come from noble families. They are all virtuous and intelligent. That's true. Jing Guifei allowed a palace maid to top up her tea. She turned and continued. Lao San's wife comes from a well-educated family. She must be one of those rare talented girls. I don't dare lay claim to talented. Qing Bailu stood and bowed. Jing Guifei Nyang is overestimating Erxi. Jing Guifei looked at the pale white dress she was wearing and looked at the complicated red tight, girdled wide-sleeve dress embroidered with a yuan. Even if it was a bit wasteful, for the end of the year, the red did look more celebratory. And Guipin silently watched and occasionally sipped tea. Her own Erxifu hadn't married in yet. She wasn't as high in status as these two, so she didn't have any desire to compete. But Lauer's wife, she was truly good-looking, too good-looking. Before this girl had married, she had seen her in the palace, but she hadn't been this attractive. The emperor has arrived. The empress has arrived. The two Gifiniangniang that had been throwing verbal darts simultaneously stopped talking and respectfully stood, then slowly knelt down. Chu Qingju, who was watching on the side, sighed in amazement. Look at how familiar they were with their duties. They could change at the blink of an eye. As Jing Guifei knelt, and hearing the Taijian call for a kowtow, Chu Qingju then helped Jing Guifei stand. Taking advantage of this movement, she found that Jing Guifei's eyes as she looked at the emperor were expressionless. She couldn't help but look at the man standing at the highest place. The old man was wearing a bright yellow dragon robe. His swollen physique had turned a once handsome man to an average man. But just this kind of a man, he was the aim of all the thousands of machinations of the women in the Hogong. He was the one that wasted all of their youth and beauty. Today is the end of the year. You all don't have to be so courteous. Sit. Qingde Emperor waved his hand and sat down. He saw as the people kneeling at his feet shout, 10,000 years, 3 times before they dare sit down, and the smile on his face became even more visible. A couple of claps, and women dressed in multicolored costumes streamed in and gave festive dances. The drinks and dishes came out like a stream of water. Chu Qingju looked at the plates of food and her mouth twitched. But seeing Jing Guifei sitting like a mountain, in the end she didn't speak. No wonder Jing Guifei told them to use refreshments before coming here. These dishes appeared beautiful, but from the looks of it, they didn't have much warmth. In the winter, who liked eating this? Turning her head, she looked at the young women dancing in the middle of the hall, each bend of the waist and each wave of the arm full of flirtation. But all the people in the audience had a slight smile on their faces. The mirth at the corner of their lips was as though it was stamped on. Not too much, but not too little. After a dance, there came some boys and girls in costumes, singing about luck and good fortune. Chu Qingju wasn't interested and allowed Mu Jin to pick a piece of refreshment to waste time. Lao Di too. Why isn't your Zhonger here today? Shu Guifei looked at Wei Qingyi, her voice full of regret. There are not many children in the palace. It's much too quiet. Guifei Nyang, Zhonger got a cold a few days ago. Erxi was worried that he would transfer the sickness to the valued persons if he came to the palace, so he was left in the Fu. Zhong was Wei Qingyi's child. Usually, he was carefully protected, so when she heard Shu Guifei mention her child, her heart tightened. On her face, she only allowed a warm smile to appear, her voice full of respect as she promised, when he get better, Erxi will bring him in to greet Nyang. So that's why. Shu Guifei nodded, and after she ordered somebody to take some medicine to Wei Qingyi, she smiled and commented, we should always be careful with children. It's been cold these past days. As a mother, you have to put more effort in. This attitude, it was as though she was the mistress. Sitting beside Wei Qingyi, Wei Guipin didn't even say a word, a gentle smile hanging on her face. Wei Qingyi concurred. She turned her head to personally serve when Guipin a 1,000-layer cake. Mu Fei, taste this. Sweet yet not too sweet, it's good. The smile on when Guipin's face became warmer. After 2 bits of the 1,000-layer cake, you don't have to be attending me constantly. Eat something yourself. If Mu Fei has eaten well, it is the good fortune of Erxifu. Wei Qingyi put down her chopsticks and smiled as she poured Wen Guipin a cup of plum flower wine. This wine doesn't go to the head. It's perfect to accompany the 1,000-layer cake. Lao Das is very virtuous. The smile on Shu Guifei's face became a few fractions fainter. She looked at Qin Bailu, who was sitting with a glass of wine, and felt her heart beat unevenly. She turned to look at Jing Guifei and asked, "Jiejie, don't you think?" Jing Guifei glanced at Shu Guifei. She smiled and praised, "These Erxifu, they are all full of filial love. Mimi doesn't have to admire when Gui Pin and forget your own good Erxi." She didn't feel good herself and wanted to drag her down as well. Did she think she had no brains? Qin Bailu knew that her popo wasn't happy and set down the wine cup. She turned to personally place Shu Guifei a piece of crab meat into her bowl. Shu Guifei made a slight bite before commenting, "This winter crab isn't as tender as autumn's. Such a big grab, it only looks good." Qin Bailu's hand tightened around the chopsticks. In the end, she could only smile and suggest, "Mu Fei speaks the truth. Why don't we try this picked duck tongue? Erxi thinks it is acceptable." "No need," Shu Guifei smiled. "You have a good time. Bin Gong doesn't have an appetite." Bin Gong sees that it seems pretty good. Jing Guifei looked at Chu Qingju. "Erxifu, get some for Bin Gong to taste." Chu Qingju saw the other wanted to display her, so she could only smile and push back her sleeve to pick two for Jing Guifei. She also considerately broke the soft bone at the end of the tongue. "Such a honest child. Don't just pay attention to me." Jing Guifei finished the duck's tongue and smiled to let the palace maid behind her serve Chu Qingju a bowl of soup. "Us women should drink more soup. There's many benefits." Chu Qingju gave a happy smile as she raised the bowl. She said in an intimate tone, "Thanks, Mu Fei." Then she buried her head to focus on obediently consuming the soup. Shu Guifei looked at this scene of motherly and filial love and threw her eyes away with a snort. But her heart started to beat even less smoothly. Jing Guifei used a handkerchief to wipe her lips in a very good mood. Only a stupid woman would make it difficult for her own Erxifu in front of others. Whatever matter, go back to your own rooms to fight it out. Your Erxifu is a titled Wang Fei. This entire place was filled with noble matrons and titled ladies. If your Erxifu was shamed, as her popo, would you benefit? It was shaming your own son and letting others laugh at you. At the men's side, the top right table was the four He brothers and a few old Wang Yi from the imperial family. But these old Wang Yi were very perceptive and courteous to the four. He Hung sat between He Yuan and He Qi and conversed with everyone present with a smile on his face. He held himself with elegance and a majestic bearing. "Sidi's good matter is coming up. You should drink a few more cups with your brothers today." He Qi raised the wine cup and called He Hong, "Come." Drunkenness had already started to make its way across He Ming's face, but he couldn't refuse his Daji's request. He could only raise his wine cup with a painful expression. "Thanks, Daji. Didi will finish first." He Yuan's pale finger rubbed the rim of the cup. He looked at Lao Da's forthright manner as he finished toasting everyone at the table. He raised an eyebrow as he tapped the wine cup. "Daji has a good capacity. Haha, Daji can't do anything else, but this capacity, I have." He Qi raised his hand to pat He Yuan's shoulder, the blow causing the wine in He Yuan's hand to splash out. "I can't drink delicately like you." Looking at his hand that had been splashed with wine, He Yuan disdainfully put down the wine cup. He took out a handkerchief to clean his hand before he retorted coldly, "Didi doesn't go to the restaurants and tea shops as often as Daji, so my capacity for drinking naturally isn't as great as Daji." As though he hadn't heard the underlying thrust in the words, He Qi chuckled. "Men cannot be unable to drink wine. Don't you think so, Erdi? It's not just men that can drink wine, and not all men would like drinking wine." He Hung smiled as he raised his cup to He Qi. "Occasionally drinking a few cups along is a relaxing thing, but it's better to avoid to drink like your life depended on it. Didi doesn't have the capacity that Daji has. This cup is to salute Daji." Finishing, he didn't care to see He Qi respond and threw back his head to drink to the bottom. He Yuan watched with cold eyes and sneered with disdain. He took the new cup that the Taijian served. Erdi's words are rational. He Qi keep on smiling in a forthright manner but didn't keep toasting others. He quietly sat on his spot and started to eat. He Hung lowered his head and smiled as he swung the empty cup in his hand. Chapter 33. The first day of the new year at Wang Fu after the drinks and dishes were taken down. It was time for the tributes from each of the subordinate countries. Chu Qingju looked at the obedient diplomats and the matter-of-fact attitude of everybody else and suddenly understood what might is right. As the Taijian finished reading the pages of the lists that the diplomats presented, she found that those who had a larger tribute had faces with color, and those with few tributes were full of poverty, as though they wanted to kowtow to Qing the Emperor to express the helplessness they felt that they didn't have any more to offer. When these diplomats retreated, it had been more than an hour. Chu Qingju held a teacup and had a new insight into the Long dynasty. This mighty dynasty, it was akin to a holy land in the eyes of the surrounding little countries. Because of this, the likelihood that there would be an attack on the Long dynasty in the next few decades was very small. It was then no wonder that Qing the Emperor had such a weak personality. At this time, a heavy drum started. Chu Qingju saw the Emperor and Empress walk out of the Great Hall and kneel on the white stone platform outside the hall. As she followed everybody outside, she went into a daze as she knelt with Jing Guifei. She listened as Qing the Emperor gave his prayers to the heaven. He seemed to be begging for good weather in the coming year and a good, fulfilling life for the citizens. When the fireworks exploded above Chu Qingju's head, she finally woke up. Coincidentally, at this time the prayers of the Emperor stopped. She supported Jing Guifei to stand and retreat to one side. Then she heard the singing voices of the musicians and the chatter flow into her ear. She raised her head and saw the multicolored fireworks in the sky. She couldn't help but blink her eyes. Her eyes seemed sore and uncomfortable. Jing Guifei also stared in a daze at the fireworks before lowering her head and informing, "Emperor and Empress have already returned to their palace. It's late now. You should return too." Finishing, she took a palace maid's hand. "Ben Gong is also tired. Mu Fei, Erxi will take you back." Chu Qingju held Jing Guifei's hand. She saw tiredness between her brows and took the cape that Mu Jin had prepared to wrap around Jing Guifei. "There's no need." Jing Guifei looked at the red dress that Chu Qingju wore, and her hand gently fell on the knot of the cape in front of her throat. "It's cold at night. You and Hunger should return early. This isn't far from Zhongjing Palace. Ben Gong will sit on the step carriage." Finishing, she waved her hand and dismissed Chu Qingju, walking away with the support of a palace maid. Chu Qingju stood for a while at the original spot before she let Mu Jin help her as she walked down the high white jade stairs. The long train of the dress flowed across the stone steps as though a stream of water had passed by. At the bottom of the stone steps, the four He brothers stood mutually a few steps away. He Yuan's face was icy. Behind him was an expressionless Qin Bailu. The two of them originally didn't have many feelings between them, but when the two had met, Qin Bailu acted as though she had been bullied. That was enough to make He Yuan flip his face, so the two of them stood an arm's length away with mutually frozen faces. Qin Bailu hated the fact that her popo had shamed her and was angry that He Yuan didn't treat her warmly. Originally, she had been bullied, and now she had to act according to He Yuan's temper, so she felt even angrier. She didn't care what others, though, and just stood with a heavy expression. Looking at her, He Yuan irritably moved aside his gaze. When he raised his head, he saw a crimson-clad figure come down across the white jade steps. The white and red, under the light of the fireworks, had an unspeakable sense of beauty. He tried to regain focus. When the person came near, he found it was He Heng's Wang Fei. When he saw it was his brother's woman, he didn't look any more. He faintly moved his gaze away and turned to walk without another word. There evidently wasn't any desire to bid farewell to his brothers. He Ming wanted to say farewell, but seeing that Deji and Erji seemed as though they didn't see it, he hesitated and then lowered his head. "Your hands are a bit cold." He Hung walked to the stairs, and as Chu Qingju stepped on the last step, he grabbed her hand. He took down the cape he was wearing and wrapped it tightly around Chu Qingju before he said to He Qi and He Ming, "Deji, Sid, I'm going to leave first. Feel free, Erdi." He Qi glanced at the tightly bundled Erdimei, smiled and waved his hand. "It's late. Erdi and Erdimei should return early." No wonder Lao protected her like she was his eyes and was wearing a not well-made pouch. He looked with a teasing look at He Hung. This Erdimei did have some beauty. Ming was so honest that he didn't even dare look anywhere. He respectfully bowed with his hands in front. Ji, take care. He made as to accompany them. The fox fur that swept across the nose was a bit ticklish, so Chu Qingju raised a hand to push it aside. She happened to saw Ming's proper farewell. There's no need, Sid. Hung held Chu Qingju's and gently refused. We're brothers. There's no need to be so polite. Finishing, he turned to leave. Ming stared in confusion at the figure of her Ji striding away. The step he had taken hadn't even been completed. After you get married, you'll understand. Chi patted his shoulder and happened to see Wei Qingyi come out. He finished. Ji's also leaving. You should return early too. Finishing, he boldly also left. Ming watched with even more confusion as Chi walked aside. He saw Saw come over and bowed in greeting. In such a quick length of time, all his brothers left. He felt it was even harder to understand them. It was a rare night that there wasn't a curfew in the palace. Ming waited for everybody to finishing leaving before he started walking towards Nguiping's palace. Nguiping's palace wasn't big. The furnishings weren't exquisite, but because she had an imperial son, the Department of Household Affairs didn't dare skimp. Compared to the consorts that were not favored, her days were already very good. She never lacked the necessities. Mother and son were always afraid of other people's suspicions, so they didn't spend much time together normally. Meeting today, they could speak more. When Nguiping heard her son mention what had happened after the night banquet, she couldn't help but laugh. It's not our business what they do. As to Ning Wang's words, seeing her son's ignorance, the smile on her face brightened. Just a joke, you don't have to think about it. Duan Wang's wife had an exquisite appearance. As the imperial family, they didn't lack in beautiful women, but Duan Wang's wife had an extra hint of flavor in there. As a person that had stayed for so long in the palace, she naturally understood how attractive this kind of women was to men. As a Wang Fei, to have this kind of looks, she didn't know if it was a boon or a curse. Thinking back to Duan Wang Fei as she subserviently drank tea and ate dessert next to Jing Guifei, Nguiping shook her head. Jing Guifei wasn't a simple person. Reminiscing back to how she was the same age when she had entered the palace, she wanted for Duan Wang Fei to have a comfortable life. She said in a meaningful tone, Minger, in the future, treat your wife well. It's hard to be a woman. Ming obediently answered, but still didn't understand how the topic had moved to his future wife. Maybe it was that he was too dumb, little Ming Wangyi thought helplessly. After the new year, it was the first day of the first month of the new year. Chu Qingju and He Hung sat in the great hall of the Wang Fu. The major and minor stewards came up one by one to perform greetings for the new year, and the lower-ranked servants kowtowed outside the hall. Listening to the variety of celebratory words of the servants, Chu Qingju motioned for Mu Jin and Shu Kuei to reward these people. She looked at the joy and cheer on these people's faces. Thinking back to the previous life and her mood when she had received a bonus at her agent company, it was probably the same as these people here. Nukai kowtows to Wang Yi and Wang Fei and hope Wang Yi and Wang Fei have a good and smooth new year. Qianchang Xian and Ming He were close to He Hung. The wishes they said were shallow and clear, but the loyalty on their faces were more visible than any other. Chu Qingju looked at the two of them and then at He Hung. She commented, Wang Yi, they don't have it easy running her and they're with you every day. You have to give them a good reward. Hearing this, He Hung smiled. He pointed out, in our home, it's Wang Fei, you, who makes the decisions. So it's you who decides how to reward them. The stewards present heard Wang Ye's words and stopped breathing. In the last few days, Wang Fei had been controlling Hu Yuang, but some people were still trying to worm their way through. Today, Wang Yi was saying it very blankly. Some of the people who understood felt sweat forming on their foreheads. Since that is so, then Xia will take matters into her own hands. When there were many people around, Chu Qingju followed protocol and called herself Xia in spite of the fact she disliked this ilism very much. Mu Jing, give 2 pouches to the 2 gonggong. The 2 received the pouches, not squeezing or looking at them. They instantly kowtowed and gave thanks, their attitudes extremely deferential. Those 2 were definitely worthy of serving by He Heng's side. They had no visible flaws. She looked at the audience and announced in a loud voice, it's the first There's no need to be so reserved. You can all retreat." The servants kowtowed again before bowing as they left. Coming out of the great hall, some started admiringly at the two senior gong for catching the eye for the master and mistress. They carefully flattered them, and some tried to find out what the pouches contained, but were brushed off by the two men. After the people in the surroundings left, the two then opened the pouches. It wasn't some rare item in the pouch, but a banknote for 50 taels of silver. The two simultaneously gave a sigh of relief. If Wang Fei really did bestow some rare item, then it would be troublesome. The two exchanged a look. Qian Chang Xian sighed. "Our Wang Fei isn't a simple one. Us two have to do our best in the future." For normal people, 50 taels of silver was a large fortune, but to them, it wasn't that hard to get. Wang Fei had given them this number, and it showed that Wang Fei wasn't trying to entice them. It was telling them she thought them worthy, but hoped that they wouldn't do something they shouldn't. 50 taels, it matched their status perfectly. Wasn't it just telling them to know their place? After the stewards had left, He Heng's women came in a short while. In these women, other than the 4 shirtia that had status, there was a Tong Fong called Bai Ji. He Heng originally had 3 Tong Fong, but Yun Qing had been married off to someone on an estate. Banxia had been sentenced by Chu Qingju to become a laundress, so the only one remaining that Chu Qingju hadn't saw before was Bai Ji. After these women greeted her, Chu Qingju didn't have any advice to say to them. She turned to ask Yi Heng, "Wang Yi, do you have anything to say?" Yi Heng didn't understand, but to the shirtia, he really didn't have anything to say, so he shook his head. "Since Wang Yi has nothing to say, you can all leave." Chu Qingju raised her teacup. "Mu Jin, take out the red pockets that I prepared for them. Usher them out." The shirtia stood in shock. They hadn't expected to be so quickly thrown out. Where was the required lecturing that occurred in other fuss? Wasn't she supposed to say something along the lines of "serve Wang Yi well, respect the Wang Fu's rules"? Each one of them held a red pocket and hadn't recovered when they came out of the great hall. Luo Yinxiu asked dazedly, "We're leaving like this? If we don't return, what are we doing here?" Han Qing he pulled on the cape she wore and walked away without looking back. Bai Ji looked with some reluctance at the great hall before she slowly started her steps. Inside the hall, Chu Qingju stood and shook her body. "Wang Yi is reluctant to part with the beauties?" He Heng put down the teacup in his hand. He followed in standing. In a helpless tone, he announced, "It's almost noon, let's go eat." Finishing, he pulled Chu Qingju's hand and said warmly, "Don't think too much." Hearing this, Chu Qingju smiled, but there wasn't any mirth in her eyes. Chapter 34 Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I thought the holidays would be more relaxed, not busier than normal. Chu Qingju held a thick stack of gift lists from each fu. She rubbed at her forehead and put the lists to one side. "After we finish with these, this year's festivities will pretty much be over. Celebrating the new year is to indulge in the celebration, so naturally there will be more gifts." Mu Jin kneaded at her shoulders as she persuaded. "It has been tiring these past days going to the other Wang Fu. After you go to Xiangqing Ho Fu tomorrow, it would be relaxing." Chu Qingju was very satisfied with Mu Jing's skill. At this time, her eyes were at half-mast. "It's not that simple. Tomorrow, at Xiangqing Ho Fu, it wouldn't just be me. Womenfolk from the other Fu will also be there. It will still be busy." At year's end, the tradition of visiting each other still hasn't changed much in this place. Chu Qingju was sick of hearing plays, nauseous when she saw meat. Thankfully, due to her high status, she didn't have to run around. Wang Fei, Yuzan walked in. She saw Chu Qingju's relaxed state and informed, "Wang Fei, Baorong Ho Fu sent you an invitation." Baorong Ho Fu? Chu Qingju remembered that this Marchioness of Baorong was at odds with Liang Shi and was one of He Yuan's, so she waved her hands. "Put it down. Send somebody with a reply that I don't have the time." The type of house that was Baorong Ho Fu, they were shameless enough to send her an invitation. Did they think that because she didn't like Liang Shi, she would give them the honor? Such a joke. Yuzan put away the invitation. She gossiped. Newbie heard, this year, they had picked many beautiful women to enter the place from all the places. It's unknown if some will enter our Fu. Chu Qingju moved her neck to relieve the soreness there before replying faintly, "It hasn't happened yet. There's no need to worry. But get Huang Yang to look inside the fu. If somebody starts something, tell me straight away." Yuzhan heard that Wang Fei's tone with calm and assumed that Wang Fei had a plan, so she stopped. She reported, "These last days, there wasn't anything, but a few days ago, Han Shijie and Feng Shijie argued for a bit in the garden." Chu Qingju smiled. "Don't stop them. Let's wait a few days." Han Qing, he was a good hand at moving with the current. When Feng Zijin was favored, she followed Feng Zijin like she was her alpha. Now that she, as Wang Fei, had the power, she naturally had to show her side. There wasn't anything interesting in this type of person. Chu Qingju was too lazy to see her act inside. Get somebody to go without to inventory the gifts from outside and put them into stores with Qian Changxan and the others. Hearing this, Yuzhan bowed and retreated. Mu Jin said hesitantly, "Wang Fei, Han Shijie's personality shifts constantly. Newbie is worried that she will have ideas in the future. It's still nothing no matter how many ideas she has." Chu Qingju laughed lightly. She is the oldest woman at Wang Ye's side. Wang Yi doesn't like her anymore. She naturally has to find somebody to rely on. I don't need to always keep an eye on such a person. Mu Jin understood what Wang Fei had meant. No matter how this flea was strong, it was still a flea. It can't become a tiger. Spending too much focus on a flea, that was throwing away a watermelon to get a sesame seed. In the afternoon, He Hung returned from a banquet. After he drank half a cup of tea, he finally controlled his drunkenness. He ordered the servants to prepare a bath, and when he saw a few Yahuan follow in, he waved his hand. "Retreat. Ben Wang doesn't need your service." The people inside the room all retreated. He took off his clothes and relaxed in the bathtub for a while before he started to wash. After he put on his inner robe, he then called for servants. He ordered, "In the future, Ben Wang doesn't need any servants for a bath." Just now at the banquet, he had heard a joke. A certain nobleman had been touching a servant girl during his bath, who knew that he had been caught by his powerful wife. During the resulting argument, his manhood had been wounded. The rumor was that it was crippled now. This incident had caused the male guests that heard it to feel their lower half hurt. And He Hung didn't have any more interest in letting servant girls serve him during his bath. At least, he didn't have any interest in the short term. Reminiscing back to the endless pleasure of that Mandarin duck's bath with Chu Qingju, He Hung felt that his throat was itchy. After he was attired, He Hung adjusted the deep blue pouch at his waist. To Wang Fei's place, Ming He, who had been serving at the side, was used to it by now. He took up Wang Ye's cape and followed. He mentioned for the young Taijian at the back to follow as well. Qian Changxian was sorting the gifts for stores right now, so he had to focus for the time being. It wasn't early in the day when He Hung returned. After a bath, it was already time for the evening meal. Chu Qingju saw him come, and the two could use the meal together. Even though vegetables occupied the majority of the dishes on the table, the two had a good appetite. After the noon, it was still early. He Hung had an itch for a game of Weiqi 1, and just had to have a match with Chu Qingju. Chu Qingju, who only knew the rules, had to helplessly sacrifice herself. If heaven would give He Hung a chance, he would never let Chu Qingju play Weiqi with him. Looking at the terrible state of the board, and the interested look in Chu Qingju's eyes, he helplessly put down a stone. "Ah, Wang Yi, how can you play here?" Chu Qingju saw her stones were blocked and couldn't resist picking up the stone that had been put down before. "Then I won't play here. Change a place." "Change? For gentlemen, once the stone is down, it cannot be moved. How many times have you changed your stones tonight?" He Hung couldn't help but sigh. This was the worst game he had played his entire life. Even when he had just started learning, it hadn't been as torturous as right now. "I'm a woman. I have the right to regret it. It's you men that are gentlemen. It doesn't count with me." Chu Qingju shoved the white stone into He Hung's hand. She picked up her black stone and put it down somewhere else here. He Hung pretended not to see the gap at that place and randomly put his stone down. Watching as Chu Qingju joyfully ate his stone, he asked, "Didn't you just say that women had great intelligence? What does women's intelligence have to do with me regretting my move?" Chu Qingju raised an eyebrow, a face full of surprise. "Wang Yi, you must have misunderstood. Finishing, she put down another stone. He wanted to say that it was his move, but seeing the other's cheerful state, he couldn't open his mouth. The Weiqi skill that he had so much pride in front of his Wang Fei, it was a total loss. When a person just learned something, it was the time that they had the greatest interest. Chu Qingju was at the point where she had the greatest interest. After playing for close to 2 hours, He looked at the disaster of a match and avoided the interested face of Chu Qingju. He stood and walked in front of Chu Qingju, bending at the waist to lift the person. "It's late now. Qingju, you should retire with me." Chu Qingju wrapped an arm around his neck. "Then you have to play with me tomorrow." He felt his throat choke, but the smile on his face was as warm as always. "We'll talk about it tomorrow." Finishing, he carried the person as he walked towards the inner room. Minghe, Mu Jin, and the others saw the situation and quickly retreated. But as they left, they both thought, Wang Fei's Weiqi skills, it stank terribly. It was a miracle that Wang Yi could tolerate it for this long. Maybe it was that he was too worked up from playing Weiqi, but after he finished with Chu Qingju, he felt very relaxed. Under the light of the night luminous pearls, he saw the eyes with which she looked at him. With a look, he couldn't help but reach out with his hand to that soft skin. The feeling under his hand was too comfortable, so comfortable that he didn't dare move his hand away. Ticklish. When Hang's hand moved to her waist, Chu Qingju couldn't resist lightly kneeing the other, who knew that she pressed on the wrong spot, and that hand moved from the waist downwards. The mischievous hand caused Chu Qingju to squirm but was suppressed by He. He rubbed against her chest and asked, "Is it ticklish here?" The hand had reached a certain warm place, and Chu Qingju felt her body soften. On the bed, He could be considered a very good man. At least, when the other was being satisfied, Chu Qingju was also satisfied. She reached across the other's back, her moist lips brushing past his slightly cold ear. She blew a warm breath, also ticklish. This move lit a great fire. He bit down gently on her collarbone. "I'll help you stop it." It was another physical exercise full of hotness. After both of them were comfortable, Chu Qingju leaned against He and rubbed against the other's body for warmth as she fell asleep. He put his hand at Chu Qingju's waist. Looking at her sleeping visage, he closed his eyes and fell asleep. The second morning, Chu Qingju sat up on the bed and looked at the man wiping his face with a cotton cloth. She said with some surprise, "Wang Yi is coming with me to Houfu?" A husband accompanying the recently married daughter to perform New Year greetings to the elders, isn't it normal? He threw the towel back into the basin and motioned for the kneeling servant girl holding the basin to leave. He walked in front of Chu Qingju and pinched her face. The smooth feeling he received made his mood even better. "Wake up quickly and eat. Later, you still have to attire yourself." Finishing, he didn't look at Chu Qingju's reaction and walked out the inner room. Chu Qingju stilled and was speechless. A man satisfied in a certain area, he did become much gentler. After the morning meal, when Chu Qingju was dressing, He sat with interest at the side. Seeing the servant girl's present box after box of jewelry, he opened. "Put on that buyao I gave you." Hearing this, the hand Chu Qingju was using to pick a buyao made a turn and held up that Qingluan biao to Yu Zhan, who was doing her hair. Looking at this peerless buyao inserted in her hair, Chu Qingju's lips curled. "This buyao is so beautiful I don't dare wear it. No matter how beautiful, it needs somebody to wear it." He came behind her, touching the buyao. He took the forehead jewel and personally put it on Chu Qingju. He bent down to look at her image in the mirror. "As long as you like them, these coarse items don't cost anything." Chu Qingju rubbed the forehead jewel. She raised her head to look at He. There was a warm smile on the other's face, as though he was an infatuated man looking at his beloved woman. She smiled and turned her head down. She drew with an eyebrow pencil to make her brows even more beautiful. After she finished drawing the flower between her brows, she raised her head again and asked with a bashful smile, "Is this good?" He felt as though he was struck by this smile. The smile on his own face was so gentle it was like water. "Very good." Pulling up the person by the mirror, he exclaimed, "The teeth are as white as a rhinoceros horn. The eyebrows are as beautiful as a butterfly. The blushing face is akin to a blooming lotus. The pale skin is like the frost, is just so. But there aren't enough poems in this world to describe the feelings I have at this time. In Wang Ye's eyes, I am that good. Chu Qingju tilted her head. I don't believe it. Has Qingju ever heard that beauty is in the eye of the beholder? He Hung smiled as he touched the hair next to her face. It's fine. You'll naturally understand in the future. It's late. We should go now. Yuzan and the younger Yahuan who had been doing the attiring were blushing at one side, amazed at the depth of feeling between Wang Yi and Wang Fei. It was the people by the door, Qian Changxian, Ming He and Mu Jin, who had much steadier faces. They quietly had their heads low as though they couldn't hear what Wang Yi and Wang Fei said, and they were just wooden puppets that couldn't hear or speak. Chapter 35. The Tian family. The Marquis of Xiangqing, Tian Jinku, wasn't yet 50 this year. His personal conduct was sincere, but he wasn't inflexible. He had a good reputation in Jing City. Changde Fu was probably the only entity he didn't like in the entire city of Jing. By now, there wasn't anyone in Jing City that didn't know Duan Wang Fei was close to her relatives in Xiangqing Hofu, and treated Xiangqing Hofu like her own maternal family. Due to the fact that what the Duke of Changde had done really wasn't something to be proud of, there were some that praised Tianjin Ku for being so loving. Not everybody would care for a niece that didn't even have a mother. Karma was real. See how Duan Wang Fu had distanced itself from Changde Gong Fu. This was karma. Today was the Tian family banquet. After the morning just had passed, the guests started to arrive. Tianjin Ku took his two sons, Tian Kuan and Tian Jun, to welcome the male guests. Just as he was deep in conversation with the guests, he saw the stewards run over quickly to say Duan Wang Yi had come. Duan Wang. Tian Kuan looked in shock at the steward. He realized the surrounding guests were gazing in this direction and lowered his voice to ask, Father, why would Duan Wang come? Tianjin Ku waved a hand. Lauda, come with me to the middle door to welcome Wang Yi. Lauer, stay here and accompany the guests. Finishing, he walked with great strides towards the outside. Tian Jun looked at the backs of his father and brother. When he turned, he saw all the guests had curiosity on their faces, so he started to divert their attention. He was surprised inside. His family didn't have many interactions with Duan Wang. Was it really that Duan Wang was willing to lower himself for Mimi? Tian Gongzi, is there a valued guest coming? A guest of the same age as him put his hands up in a greeting. Who is it? Tian Jun smiled as he returned the greeting. Everybody is a valued guest. When the person arrives, everybody will have to drink a few more cups. Of course. This person smiled. Even though he hadn't found out anything, but at least what Tian Jun said didn't embarrass him, so he wasn't angry. The others saw that it wasn't likely and they settled down. No matter what, they would see them later. This person might be of high status, but he wouldn't be the emperor. Tian Kuan stood behind his father and looked at the large 8-person sedan imprinted with the characters of Duan Wang Fu stop at the gate. He raised his feet to walk outside the door and bowed. This lowly official welcomes Wang Yi, Wang Fei. Qian Changxian came up to bow to Tian Kuan with both hands raised. He bowed to open the curtain and revealed to Tian Kuan He Hong and Chu Qingju sitting together. There was a hint of intimacy between the two. He quickly lowered his head, afraid to look. Biao Xiong, doesn't have to be so courteous. He Hong held Chu Qingju's hand as they walked out of the sedan. He smiled. We are one family, there's no need to be so polite. Finishing, he held out a hand to let Tian Kuan straighten before he walked into the gate with Chu Qingju. Juju. Chu Qingju gave a very deep bow. She looked at the middle-aged man in front of her. His appearance was proper, and he had a strong posture. It was easy to feel at ease with this man. As her uncle, Tianjin Ku hadn't spent much time with Chu Qingju. He made a motion as to support Chu Qingju and quickly scanned her. He saw that his niece seemed to be living well before he bowed with 2 hands up. Wang Yi, Wang Fei. Marquis doesn't have to be so courteous. You are Wang Fei's Jujio, so you are Bin Wang's Jujio. He Hung returned a greeting. There's no need to be so polite. Tianjin Ku smiled as he straightened. In a warm voice he responded, If that it's so, then this lowly official can only overlook protocol. Wang Yi, please come with this official. The smile on his face became much friendlier, but his conduct still held to protocol. But even like this, it still allowed people to feel that his attitude was much more intimate. Chu Qingju looked at this uncle of hers. No wonder he was like a fish in water in Jing City. Such conduct, everybody would praise it. It could be seen how important emotional intelligence was. The male and female guests had separate banquets. After he hung followed Tianjin Ku and left, Chu Qingju smiled at Tian Kuan, who kept 5 paces away from her, and turned to get on the already prepared sedan. Watching as the sedan was carried away by heavy labor mamas, Tian Kuan allowed a smile to appear. It seemed as though his sister had a somewhat good life. His family could rest some of their worries. Putting his hands behind at his back, he slowly headed inside. Instantly, the smile on his face grew fainter. The members of the imperial family, their desires and interests changed quickly. Who knew if Duan Wang would always treat his sister this way? He himself was a man and naturally understood those desires of men. What about a man like Duan Wang who was used to seeing beautiful women? When the sedan came into her men, it stopped. Chu Qingju came down the sedan and saw Luo Shi with a young girl standing not far away. She walked a few steps in front of Luo Shi and bowed in greetings. Good day, Jimu. Luo Shi and the girl behind quickly returned a greeting before she reached out with a hand to meet hers to observe. You look thinner. Come with me inside now. This cold period in spring is too strong. All the elders of the world were the same. When they saw younger generations after a long time, they always felt that they had become thinner. Chu Qingju intimately held Luo Shi's hand. I'm not thin. The entire Wang Fu is under my command. The servants don't dare treat me badly. Luo Shi cared for her like she was half a daughter. Seeing that she was willing to be close to her, she naturally felt happy. Luo Shi patted her hand as she said lovingly, You have to manage such a large Wang Fu. You must be tired. It doesn't matter how good you eat. Finishing, she started to ask whether the servants were easy to manage, or if she had troubles with her residence and food. Her actions were very similar to how Jing Guifei questioned He Hung. Chu Qingju answered the questions one by one. She saw the girl behind Luo Shi kept quiet all this time and inquired, Jimu, such a pretty Gunyang. Which family? She looks so adorable. Luo Shi stopped walking and looked at the Gunyang that Chu Qingju mentioned. The girl's face was already crimson. Luo Shi answered, She's the same year as you, but a month younger. It's appropriate for you to call her Mimi. This is the eldest niece of my maternal family, Wen Yao. In the future, you will spend a lot of time together, so I wanted you two to meet. Wen Yao? Luo Wen Yao? Chu Qingju instantly understood. This was the granddaughter of the Luo family that had been decreed to marry He Ming. She saw that Luo Wen Yao's face was as red as it could get and didn't ask for confirmation, only commenting, I like this mame. Luo Shi heard her inappropriate words and sighed. Just a few days. You are even more mischievous. Finishing, she pulled Luo Wen Yao over to let them stand right and left of her. But, you like this Mimi, then I don't have to worry any longer. Chu Qingju understood Luo Shi's meaning. Such a good girl forced to marry a disfavored imperial son. Not every family was willing. The waters of the imperial family were muddy. Her husband wasn't favored. None of her jolie were simple. If there wasn't somebody there, she would definitely be at a disadvantage. Thinking about it, she let a smile appear on her face. Aunt, don't worry. I will definitely care for Wen Yao Mimi like she was my own. There were 4 Erxifu in the imperial family, but the 3 had to be at odds with each other. If she was close to Luo Wen Yao, it wasn't a bad thing. But she hadn't though that the Luo family would actually take this step. It could be seen that they really loved this girl. Luo Wen Yao quietly listened to her aunt and Duan Wangfei talk. In the past, she had heard much about how before Duan Wangfei had married, she had been harshly treated by her stepmother. Today, as she saw the real person, she felt this was a blinding woman. Each move and laugh full of grace and stirring in her a strange feeling of closeness. People were very easily attracted by people dissimilar to them. Luo Wen Yao's personality was quiet and gentle. Her future husband had no conflict with Duan Wang. Seeing the friendliness of Chu Qingju, it was naturally easy to feel close to her. So when they walked into the room, the two of them had started conversing. The elder Luo Taitai, who had been sitting in the room, already expressed a relieved smile as she saw the scene. It looked like this Duan Wang Fei took after the Tian family's personality. The female guests present were close-knit to the Luo and Tian families, so they weren't too formal as they interacted with Chu Qingju. It was just when they heard that Duan Wang had accompanied Chu Qingju that they felt deeply moved. Some detected that Duan Wang Fei came in with a gunyang of the family Luo and understood what was happening. Nobody announced it, but only talked about some interesting local events to while away the time. I heard that an able person came to the Five Estates Monastery. He's very skilled at explaining the divination sticks. After the flowers bloom, I will go beg with my family. Isn't the Five Estates Monastery in the Jing suburbs? When are you going? Let's go together to beg for a stick. Chu Qingju heard this piece of conversation and put the teacup in her hand down. The dominant religion in Delong Dynasty was Buddhism. The court didn't support any, but the citizens each had their own beliefs. Luo Shi saw that Chu Qingju seemed to be interested in the Five Estates Monastery and elaborated. That Five Estates Monastery is the biggest monastery in Jing. It's on the Baiyun Mountain on the suburbs. The able person they are talking about is most likely spiritual master Xianling. If you're interested, you can go take a visit. Chu Qingju smiled. There's no need. A person's fate is already set down by the heavens. To go divine it, it would decrease the good fortune. She wasn't a resolute atheist, but she did believe that good fortune and luck will decrease with divination, so she wasn't interested in begging for a divination stick. Nobody thought Chu Qingju would say something like this. Luo Shi stared in astonishment before nodding. This is true. Luo Wenyao, listening in, felt her heart jump. She looked with respect at Chu Qingju. With such an open mind, how many women in this world could achieve such a thing? At this time, she felt that the worries she had about her marriage were just she making it difficult on herself. Nothing would be different thinking about things that had already been set in stone. It would be better for her to think how she would live the rest of her life. That was her good fortune. Thinking about this, the stare that Luo Wenyao gave Chu Qingju had a hint of gratefulness, a smile appearing on her face. After the banquet, the guests listened for a long while before bidding farewell. Chu Qingju, when most of the guests had left, finally stood and held Luo Shi's hand as she announced, "Jiumu, I need to return now." Luo Shi was a bit reluctant but had to agree. In the Fu, take care of your body. There's a lot of people you should take notice of. This was reminding her of the Si Shi, but due to Luo Shi's identity, she couldn't say it. Chu Qingju nodded before she bent to enter the sedan. After she looked again at Luo Shi, she let the servant drop the curtain. Watching as the sedan disappear outside her min, Luo Wenyao exclaimed in a quiet voice, "Duan Wang Fei is really an amazing person." Luo Shi looked at her niece and thought about the days that her niece had suffered through in Changdagong Fu. She sighed. Hopefully Duan Wang would continue to treat her well. You have to remember, for a woman to live well, the priority is to treat herself well. If she could discomfort herself, others will also do so. Luo Shi opened in a meaningful voice. Cheng Wang might not have the emperor's favor, but I have seen him before. He has a lenient personality. You don't have to be too worried. Gomu Luo Wenyao's face instantly reddened. In the midst of her bashfulness, there were a few hints of expectancy. At the main gate of Xiangqing Hofu, He Hong watched as Chu Qingju walked out of the sedan. A hint of a smile appeared on his face, and Tian Kuan, who had been accompanying him at one side, couldn't help but look. He watched as Duan Wang walked towards Biao Mei. Maybe it was that the two had such outstanding appearances, or maybe their smiles were too intoxicating. This scene was very beautiful, but it was so beautiful it didn't seem real. Tian Kuan blinked his eyes. Maybe he was thinking too much. Male relative from the female line of the same generation, older. Female relative of the same generation from the female line, younger. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.